the Industrial Revolution of the Mage Lord. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 601 Incomplete Sea Chart. Gooter stepped into Harvey's office, knelt on one knee, and saluted. Your Majesty, I am from the Northern Naval Special Operations Team. We have successfully completed our mission south, and I have come to report to you. Prawl and Sirius, who had accompanied him to the southern waters, also bowed. Harvey raised his hand for him to stand, then asked in surprise, "Have you got a complete chart?" The Major carefully handed the box to Harvey's desk. It was a piece of exquisitely carved coral, its appearance alone revealing its value. If it were given to a noble in the southern kingdoms, it would fetch a stratospheric price. Harvey didn't bother to admire the artifact. He opened the box and found, as he had hoped, a leather scroll that had clearly been stitched together. He spread it out on the table, only to discover that two corners were missing. The entire chart is still incomplete. Sirius nodded, quickly stepping forward to explain. Two settlements of the Abyssal Sea clan are willing to form an alliance with us, but the fragments of their inherited charts have long been lost and difficult to recover. Fortunately, the two missing locations are located in the southeastern corner and west of the southern continent, which happen to be areas controlled by the cave dwarves and demons, and are relatively unimportant. Harvey scanned the map intently for a moment, finally grasping the general meaning of the underground water distribution map. He raised his hand and pointed to a thick line drawn with silver mineral dye in the north direction. This is the glacial river originating from the Godspeen Mountains, right? This is the Chatlant River in Isengard. In that case, this must be the underground dark lake located in the Great Rift. Prawl smiled and added, "Your Majesty's guess is completely correct. The silver lines depict the surface water system, and the black represents the underground water system. Rivers like the Chatlant sometimes gush out of the ground and sometimes sink into the ground." Everyone's eyes followed Harvey's finger, following the thin silver line of the glacial river all the way north to the approximate area where the Great Bear Lake was located. Then they saw a thick black line that connected it with a large black area almost at the edge of the map. As we expected, the Ice Sea not only leads directly to Great Bear Lake, but also extends northwestward through countless tributaries, which is why they can secretly reach the Great Rift of Isengard. Unfortunately, the Sea People's crude and primitive mapping techniques are incapable of accurately determining the scale of the underground waterway. After all, they only need to master simple route directions. The so-called migratory ascension ceremony is merely a solitary expedition of a few reserve priests. Any place they can reach by swimming can be mapped as a route for reference. The floating island fortresses of the Lizardmen, however, are enormous, and not all marked routes are suitable for their submerged navigation. Therefore, Harvey can only identify two existing routes, the Ice Sea to Great Bear Lake, and the Ice Sea to the Great Rift of Isengard. It just so happens that Pierce and his team have just finished inspecting and deploying military equipment at the Ice Sea base and have summoned several generals from the Defense Department. I'm afraid we'll need to hold a meeting to discuss this. The guards hurried away after receiving the Emperor's orders. Harvey, having a moment's leisure, changed the subject, smiling at Gooters and asking, "Tell me, how did you manage to get so many chart fragments from them so quickly?" It was impossible that a few warships simply sailed over, blasted the gates of the Coral Holy City with cannons, and then forcibly snatched them from the enemy, right? Gooters straightened his uniform and replied in a serious tone, "Your Majesty, we won the divine duel for the Coral Sea clan, and also helped the Abyssal clan eliminate the savage sea beasts that were wreaking havoc on several tribes." Harvey was stunned, surprised. "It's that simple? You managed so much in less than a month?" Sirius smiled and said, "The Major and his naval soldiers acted efficiently, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. When the three ironclad warships set out south, they were fully loaded with artillery and ammunition, as well as a considerable amount of supplies. They had both the carrot and the stick ready. Upon arriving at the holy city of Coral, the two sea tribes discovered they were facing a widespread external threat, a herd of giant demonic horned sharks that had accidentally migrated to the edge of their territory and were wreaking havoc on the settlements of several surrounding tribes. These massive sea beasts not only destroyed the fish they had been feeding on coral, but also targeted the sea tribes themselves as prey. In a rare act of fusion, the abyssal and coral tribes united to combat the invading demonic beasts. However, their tribes were weak, and their already limited number of priests were no match for the demonic orange sharks. Had the Northern Navy not arrived, they would have likely abandoned the holy city and fled to the coast of Pharos. We used airships to locate the mother orange shark from the air, then directly killed it with a salvo of naval gunfire. The remaining orange sharks were no match for the machine gun and beam weapon fire, and those that dove deep into the water became perfect training targets for the submarines. Gooter spoke with a hint of pride. The Navy, long the subject of jokes and gossip within the Army, had finally achieved fame in this battle, truly demonstrating its naval prowess. This decisive assistance naturally earned the respect and goodwill of the sea people. Furthermore, the necromancer cult, to which Sirius and Prawl belonged, already had a long-standing cooperative relationship with the sea people. After a heart-to-heart talk, the coral and abyssal tribes, temporarily abandoning their hostility, decided to initiate a new round of divine duels. Regardless of the outcome, if the Northern Navy could retrieve the sacred artifact from the abyss for them, they would be willing to reconcile and share their respective tribes' treasure chart fragments. What sacred object is it that they value so highly that they periodically send their best members to the abyss to retrieve it? Harvey's curiosity piqued, unable to resist asking. Sirius and Prawl exchanged a quizzical glance. It appears to be just an ordinary piece of coral, but it appears to have been eroded by some special magical substance, giving it a unique magical energy. The Sea Clan relies on this property to lure large schools of fish for their catch. It sounded like a magical bait. Of course, the two former necromancers, newly trained, weren't skilled in deep-sea diving. Ultimately, the ritual was completed by a reinforced submarine remotely controlled by Gooters, easily reaching a depth of nearly 1,000 meters, and retrieving the designated sacred coral for the Sea Clan. At the bottom of that long, deep abyss, there are countless luminescent coral stones embedded in the cliffs. We don't even need to bother searching. We can just scoop a piece with our grappling hooks and return to the surface. Gooters found it somewhat amusing that the sacred tradition practiced by the sea people for centuries was to dive into the deep sea and retrieve a single bait stone. Harvey, however, sensed something amiss in the crowd's accounts. If submarines can easily reach the area, why don't they send priests who are also skilled in water magic, unless the area is located in a unique geographical location, naturally forbidden to magic, making it completely inaccessible to spellcasters. Chapter 602 Weird Dotted Line. Since Harvey's coronation, the obsidian castle where he had long resided has undergone several rounds of expansion. While the land area has always been strictly regulated to ensure that it does not encroach on other municipal facilities in the inner city, the overall size of the building has at least doubled. Even the people have long since changed their name to refer to this deep black complex located on the inner city's high ground, calling it Your Majesty's Palace. In the new conference hall of the Imperial Palace, the military and municipal officials summoned by the Emperor looked grim. As the map of the Abyssal Sea, which had just been deciphered by the Secretariat next door, was distributed to the public, someone with a keen eye immediately noticed that a dotted line running through the Divine Spine Mountains in the center of the southern continent was hidden in the intricate pattern of the map. As the first person to see this nautical chart, I didn't notice the existence of this dotted line at the first time. Harvey raised his hand and knocked on the enlarged map in front of him. Everyone, express your opinions and talk about the meaning of this line. As Dallin pondered for a moment and spoke first, I have instructed the intelligence department to immediately contact the intelligence branch that is still stationed in the Holy Coral City, and let them ask directly the leaders and priests of the Sea Tribe who know the inside story. Maybe they will get a reply soon. Pierce subconsciously picked up the glass filled with red liquid at hand, took a sip, and said slowly, as Your Majesty said, silver represents the surface water system, and black represents the direction of the underground river. Could the dotted line be an underground passage without water flowing through it? Reiner breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly said, if it is an underground secret passage without water flow, then at least it shows that the magic lizardmen cannot control the floating island to dive and pass through the Divine Spine Mountains without anyone noticing to reach our rear. This slightly optimistic statement received very few responses. Harvey stood up and pointed at the map of the entire territory hanging on the wall, comparing it with the sea chart. If the decryption is correct, this dotted line, after crossing the Divine Spine Mountains, ends at the holy city of Goris. The sea people had always disbelieved in the god of light. Even if they explored the underground migratory routes of the pilgrims, they would never reach the papal states. Dawson stroked his red nose and chuckled. Perhaps the Sea People originally intended to use this natural underground tunnel to sneak beneath the Cathedral of Radiance, invade the Holy City, and destroy the paganism they despised. This was clearly a teasing to ease the tension. Everyone knew the Sea People were weak in combat. Let alone a counterattack on the Holy City. An ordinary inquisitor could probably crush 10 coral people with a single weapon. Sarath shook his head and looked pointedly at Harvey. If the lizardmen can discover this route, Goris will be in imminent danger. Your Majesty, do you think we need to alert the church in advance? Before Harvey could respond, the Son of Fire, sitting several seats down, muttered, I wish the lizardmen would just raid Goris and use concentrated red light to destroy those charlatans' Cathedral of Light. Fashield, standing nearby, quickly covered his colleague's mouth and hurriedly said, but after all, there are still tens of thousands of mortals living in the City of Grace. Those ordinary believers who have been deceived by the church are innocent and should not be slaughtered by this alien race for no reason. All the spellcasters officially participating in today's high-level meeting had clearly defined positions and had voluntarily chosen to join Harvey's side. They were also well aware that countless rounds of live damage testing on captive lizardmen had accurately verified and documented that these alien races were not only naturally immune to magic, but their strange skin also protected them from the church's divine attacks. This meant that the legions of combat priests trained by the City of Grace were practically no better than weak mortals against the attacks of the lizardmen. Without the support of magical weapons, the Bloodline Knights' resistance was minimal. If an enemy of equal strength appeared, these devout, fearless church warriors would be mere cannon fodder for the concentrated red light and black water weapons. The sudden appearance of an additional chasm in the originally anticipated 3 lines of defense plunged Harvey into anxiety, feeling like a paper hanger patching up gaps along the natural chasm of the Divine Spine Mountains. He pinched his aching brow, turned to his Dallin and asked, what's the current situation of the Pope's secret praying man, Priest Garrett? He lives alone in a room arranged for him by the Ministry of State. He is still stubborn and silent. He asks for nothing but water and coarse bread every day. Harvey sighed speechlessly. After the meeting, send someone to bring him to see me. Pierce was stunned for a moment, and said in surprise, Your Majesty really intends to warn the Pope? The Holy City may not believe our intelligence at all. If the dotted line represents a secret passage without water flow, the floating island fortress has no way to submarine through the Divine Ridge Mountain. If the magic lizard people intend to cross the underground on foot, there shouldn't be many troops who can make a long-distance raid to Goris, right? This inference was recognized by many people. Goris and St. Valen are separated by the mountainous kingdom of Yared in the central part of the southern continent. The two places are only 700 or 800 miles apart in a straight line, but the road is rugged and it is extremely difficult to cross mountains and ridges. The City of Grace, however, wasn't far from the Divine Spine Mountains. According to the Survey Department's precise calculations, the entire imaginary line running through the northern and southern borders was only about 300 miles, making it clear at a glance which was closer. Harvey turned his gaze to the senior officers under Pierce. What are your opinions? Vaughn stood up and replied in a deep voice, Your Majesty, I believe that capturing Yared and deploying troops directly on the Goris border is the most appropriate strategy. If the lizardmen invade the Holy City, we can dispatch reinforcements and plug the hole directly. Clearly, driven by the militant faction's natural desire for expansion, even if the lizardmen hadn't appeared, they intended to seize this opportunity to incorporate the long-coveted Principality of Yared into the United Kingdom's territory. Vaughn's words perfectly reflected the true intentions of the military. Harvey smiled helplessly at this. Well, regardless of whether the Holy City believes our warnings or not, and regardless of whether the lizardmen will emerge from the dotted line, at least, encircling Goris is the only option left to do, before the other high-ranking military officials could even register a glimmer of joy. Ironhead, the personal adjutant, hurried into the conference hall and whispered something urgently in Harvey's ear. Everyone, the news from the Holy City of Coral. Harvey stood up and spoke seriously. The chief priests of the Coral and Abyssal tribes have replied that the dotted line represents the tide. This dotted secret passage, hidden deep underground and running north and south through the Divine Spine Mountains, would dry up during the spring and winter ebbs, then fill again in the summer and autumn, wide enough for more than a dozen shallow water heavy gunboats to sail abreast. Chapter 603 Undercurrent. Since the Ministry of State gained access to newspapers as an official outlet for disseminating information, important events within the United Kingdom have spread rapidly throughout the kingdom, drawing the close attention of the people and the nobility everywhere. Unlike in the past, when news could only be transmitted by caravans and carrier pigeons, the kingdom's propaganda department, with its own dedicated magical network communication lines, has allocated substantial funds to establish dedicated newspaper offices in every administrative city, seamlessly managing everything from sending and receiving messages to printing. In addition to designated sales locations, each city hall also has personnel prominently displaying and explaining the news in prominent locations in the squares, ensuring that even illiterate citizens have the opportunity to learn about important decisions affecting the kingdom's development. The hottest topic of recent news is the decree issued by the emperor upon his ascension to the throne, abolishing all metal currency throughout the kingdom and replacing it with paper money and gold coins. Within days of the publication of the newspaper announcing this decree, it spread across cities nationwide. Everywhere one walked, one could hear countless people enthusiastically discussing it. The attention it received even surpassed the recent public display of the alien monster specimens at the city halls. Jinhu City was no exception. Even during the day, the outer city's tavern called Warhammer was bustling with activity, with a local lower-middle-class population gathering there. Rumors about the demonetization order were swirling, and nearly everyone, drunkenly, claimed to possess top-secret insider information. The tavern owner sat bored behind the bar, flipping a silver coin in his hand. He seemed unconcerned with the booming business, his eyes occasionally glancing at a group of people sitting in the corner. "I'm trading my hard-earned gold for a pile of colorful paper," a merchant, flushed from drinking at the bar, slammed his glass down on the counter and cursed furiously. This kind of exploitation of the people is something even the most greedy nobles in the former capital wouldn't dare to do. A waiter hurried by, carrying a tray, suddenly raised an eyebrow and looked at the drunken merchant with a sullen expression. Upon hearing this, the merchant's companion quickly raised his hand to cover the other person's mouth and shouted, "What nonsense are you talking about? You are openly insulting His Majesty the Emperor, you are courting death." The man immediately realized his gaffe, his face turned pale, and he was so scared that he sobered up. These words were echoed by many people in the tavern. "I heard that this terrible idea was proposed by the wizard staff around His Majesty." There were also upright noble officials who opposed it, but they were secretly excluded and suppressed, and even fabricated charges and put them in jail. What? There is such a sensational inside story. More people were surprised. "Where did you get the news from? Is it true?" "How can it not be true? I have relatives in Jackdaw Town. Isn't it easy to know the first-hand news of the royal capital? But His Majesty the Emperor is still very young, and it is rumored that he has always acted wisely and decisively. How could he be easily manipulated by a group of wizards? Maybe it's because he is too young. Besides, His Majesty is a wizard." Once again, someone in the tavern was covered by his companions' mouths because of his overly shocking remarks. At this moment, the person who had been sitting silently at the table in the corner of the hall suddenly stood up and walked to the bar. He raised his hand to pick up the silver coin that the boss had casually thrown on the table, held it between his fingertips and raised it high. "Everyone, don't you think that this decree abolishing gold and silver currency is too absurd?" He paused, his tone of voice gradually rising. "Think about it. First the farmland was confiscated from the nobles, then the inheritance of titles was abolished, and now the currency is directly forced to be converted into waste paper. Each order is so unreasonable. If it were placed in other kingdoms in the south, those would be foolish strategies that would easily stir up civil unrest. Yes, most of you don't have titles or land, so of course you won't feel the pain at first. But now everyone is asked to hand over all the hard-earned coins to the national treasury in exchange for a pile of waste paper that can't buy a few bags of wheat. The knife is hanging over your head. Do we really have to wait until we starve to death on the streets?" Suddenly, someone in the crowd interrupted cautiously, "But, didn't Your Majesty also abolish land rent and land taxes? The city hall gave us land for free to cultivate, and the transaction tax in the market was reduced by as much as 50%. All other exorbitant taxes and levies were abolished, and even the most dreaded corvée was abolished. This was truly a benevolent act." The man at the bar sneered, "Can you guarantee that these laws will last forever? Of those people who were sent to the north by ship after ship at the dock, not a single one ever returned. They went to that barren and desolate land, and God knows how they were treated." His accomplice stood up and echoed him. Besides, who has actually seen the majesty you keep mentioning? He might just be a puppet secretly controlled by a group of wizards to achieve their goal of controlling the entire kingdom. The tavern was immediately in an uproar. How could the majesty be fake? The coronation ceremony was published in newspapers and distributed nationwide. The man snorted coldly. Those iron ships that shuttle on the river all day long have brought many chambers of commerce and ship owners who rely on water transportation to the brink of bankruptcy. The fields are full of terrible alchemical creations made by wizards. That head alone is enough to crush all of us here. And the mines, those mine owners laid off most of the workers just because they got the alchemical machinery sent from the north. The livelihoods of all ordinary people have been occupied by the evil creations of wizards. When it's your turn to starve, let's see who can still laugh. After that, he turned his head and looked at the boss at the bar with an indifferent expression. Mr. Austin, if one day, the wizard's alchemical creations can brew golden beer by themselves, can your tavern still be in business? The boss took out a small notebook from his pocket, picked up a feather pen and quickly wrote something on it, and said lightly, "Why can't I operate it? I don't brew wine myself." Then he turned around and handed the torn piece of paper in his hand through the window connecting to the back kitchen, as easy as handing over a menu ordered by a customer. A hand took the slip from the serving tray, noting that the handwriting, though a little distorted, was clearly written, defaming the emperor's demonetization decree, openly hostile to the caster, attempting to incite public sentiment, showing signs of rebellion, tisk. Although the entire conversation sounded like the ramblings of a down-and-out noble stripped of his title and power, or bankrupt businessman whose business had been taken over by the municipal chamber of commerce and state-owned factories, simmering with pent-up resentment. But there were also those with ulterior motives, fanning the flames and arbitrarily misinterpreting government laws and policies. These outrageous statements, fueled by discontent, were also clear signs of rebellion. Jarl Austin, the tavern owner codenamed Anvil, sat back in his chair. A moment later, the door to the tavern was kicked open and a team of ferocious robot police rushed in. They easily threw the guests, who had just been indignantly chatting, to the ground and escorted them out in shiny metal shackles. Catching suspected criminals had nothing to do with these secret police. Chapter 604 Consumption Trends. Harvey slammed the stack of newspapers onto the table, then, with a mixture of laughter and tears, grumbled to Ash, "I told you to publish more government and war news. Look what you've had those propaganda department writers write instead." He tapped his fingers, pointing to the text inside the newspaper, and read it out, swallowing his shame, shock. His Majesty's daily diet includes such affordable delicacies. With the current fashion trend, you too can wear the same exquisite cotton and linen clothing as high-ranking officials, interspecies marriage-seeking, tall, strong, and muscular half-orc youths. A single officer's fraternity with generous pay and benefits awaits you. Taking a deep breath, Harvey tried to keep a straight face and scolded, "I asked you to train professional journalists, but why are all you bringing out some paparazzi who specialize in writing gossip?" "Paparazzi? Haha. This description is quite appropriate. The noses of those reporters under me are indeed more sensitive than dogs." Ash scratched his head a little embarrassedly, and explained with a smile, "You also know that compared to those old-fashioned and boring policy news, the public likes gossip more, and I didn't make it up. Since I started publishing these contents, the sales of the newspaper have more than doubled. Then you should also consider my face a little. What is there about the meals I eat every day that is worth publicizing in the newspaper? You don't understand. Since your daily life is not included in the confidentiality regulations, what's wrong with publicizing it? It will make His Majesty the Emperor seem more approachable. You don't know how many people admire you." Ash blinked and teased. Once the court menu was circulated, dozens of restaurants in the market area that launched the same menu have been doing a booming business recently. Even the new official uniforms that Harvey casually commissioned, along with their design and style, became an instant fad throughout the capital. Numerous private tailors and ready-to-wear stores rushed out identical styles, carefully avoiding regulated colors and official logos, and profiting handsomely by skirting the fine line. In a sense, the Emperor's every word, action, and even his preferences became the supreme authority on fashion in the eyes of the people of the capital. Harvey, who was forced to promote goods, couldn't argue with him and could only say helplessly, "No matter what, the front-page headline of the weekly newspaper must still carry the content strictly required by the State Department." Whether it is the analysis of newly issued laws or major military operations, this aspect must not be neglected. He thought about it, and suddenly realized, slammed the table and pointed at Ash and said, "All these gossips of yours are just advertising for others." Ash was stunned, his face slightly red, and he said hesitantly, "I knew I couldn't fool you easily." After that, he turned the inside page of the newspaper, pointed at the marriage notice on it and explained, "This is the Ministry of National Defense who asked someone to pass it to me for help. It said that there are a lot of young officers in the army who have no marriage prospects, especially orcs. They are particularly unpopular in the blind date market. Helping them to start a family and build a career will also contribute to the stability of the kingdom and the army." As for some content that was obviously promotional, most of them came from the many hints sent from the Ministry of Commerce from time to time, from the launch of new bicycles to discounts on daily necessities. They were basically meant to guide and encourage the people to spend the money in their bulging pockets. This is indeed a good way to speed up the circulation of currency and increase tax revenue for the kingdom and the government. However, Ash himself probably didn't think it through that deeply, and he accidentally achieved a good thing. Thinking of this, Harvey had an idea and ordered, "In this case, you will immediately start to take charge. Change the weekly newspaper to twice-weekly publication frequency. Let private businesses bid for the vacant advertising space in the newspaper and sell it directly. Get paid to advertise for those businesses." Ash's eyes lit up at the thought, and he slapped his head. "That's right. Why didn't I think of it at the beginning? As long as the source of the goods is legal and compliant, these advertising spaces can be auctioned publicly, and the highest bidder wins. From now on, the propaganda department will no longer need to beg the State Department for funding for newspaper distribution." Ash immediately nodded and agreed to Harvey's proposal, and left the office excitedly. Asterin, who had been silent to the side, suddenly spoke up, slowly saying, "Your Majesty, is this intended to ease the situation and allay the discontent among merchants and nobles over the demonetization bill?" Harvey chuckled. "Discontent? I know they're full of it, but they can only keep it to themselves. Selling advertising space publicly in newspapers is simply to provide the public with more channels for information. Remember, in the past, ordinary people, even the urban middle class, spent most of their income on food and clothing. If they occasionally had a small surplus, most people would choose to hide it carefully at home, or even bury it in a hole in the backyard. The idea of promoting consumption was a completely new concept for the people, who were generally struggling on the poverty line and oppressed by the nobles, living in constant fear. But the new factories and farms Harvey had built across the kingdom provided these poor, struggling to make ends meet with stable and long-term jobs. The steady flow of wages ensured that they not only had enough to eat, but also gradually increased their family savings. Simply saving money and not using it wasn't good news for Harvey. Even buying an extra bar of soap or a new set of clothes each month would significantly boost tax revenue for state-owned factories and the Municipal Chamber of Commerce. When gold dollar banknotes officially replaced gold and silver currency in circulation nationwide, the public, through frequent consumption, would truly appreciate the value and purchasing power of the new currency, and the government's authority and legitimacy would be simultaneously reinforced. Tell me about the recent events in Jinhu City, the case involving nobles colluding with merchants to openly incite the people to resist the new monetary policy. Seeing Harvey bring it up, as Dallin was well prepared, responding in a deep voice, "A group of spies planted by early on waters of Westwind in the old capital have colluded with two local nobles already resentful of the confiscation of their fiefdoms, hoping to secretly stir up trouble. When the old capital fell, many local nobles who hadn't committed serious crime managed to escape judgment and punishment by simply surrendering their fiefdoms and paying a hefty fine, thanks to Harvey's whim. Many of these individuals relied on extracting land rent and taxes, exploiting the people's blood. With the loss of their livelihoods, coupled with their own inability to manage other businesses, they quickly reached a ridiculous point of near bankruptcy. It's no surprise that they could be easily provoked into colluding with Earl Westwind." Harvey was so angry that he laughed. After Earl Zephyr fled back to the Principality of Yared, hasn't he been actively working to recruit soldiers and ask for help from the Holy See? Since he is so eager to commit suicide, the plan of passing through Yared and sending troops to Goris should be put on the agenda immediately. Chapter 605 Speed Training. Michelle leaned against the slightly warming magic power core, relying on the heat radiated by the instrument's steady rotation to warm his nearly freezing body. Through the fully open airship hatch, he could clearly see the high-level battle mage flying alongside him. Mr. Holden, you really don't want to come in and rest. The fire mage had been flying independently from the airship since taking off from the Dongchuo base. Almost 2 hours had passed, and he still showed no signs of running out of mana, which was truly terrifying. Fortunately, his suggestion was quickly heeded. The Son of Fire dove into the hatch and closed the sliding hatch. You undead soul mages. You're so frail. Are you almost succumbing to the cold? Michelle gave an awkward smile. This newly developed high-speed airship already flew at a much higher altitude than ordinary models, and with a reduced weight and carrying capacity of the hatch, its speed had doubled. Even a high-level mage would be unbearable sitting in the leaky cockpit. Not everyone is like the Son of Fire, whose flight magic inherently ignites flames, and whose body, after undergoing magical transformation, is impervious to the cold. We're almost at the border between the kingdom and Isengard. After landing at Wolffang Ridge and refueling, we'll complete our test flight and return safely. The Son of Fire didn't respond, but instead asked, what's our current speed? Nearly 60 miles per hour. Michelle expertly pulled out his pocket watch, consulting the speed reference manual compiled by the Independent Aerial Combat Mage Regiment, and reported to the Son of Fire. Still can't compare to the flight magic of high-level mages. The Son of Fire curled his lips slightly in dissatisfaction, turning to observe the power core in action. The speed airship has undergone extreme improvements based on the original combat airship. Not only has the 6 split airbags been replaced with the dual airbags of the civilian Swift airship, but the original metal pod has also been replaced with a lighter composite material. Only the structural frame and hull base are made of thin steel plates, while the rest of the structure is covered with multiple layers of leather or rattan with rubber coating. The interior space of the pod was reduced by 2/3, leaving only room for the power core, externally mounted weapon racks, and a narrow space suitable for only 2 people. This extreme reduction in payload also meant that the airship could not carry additional fuel. The range at a constant cruising speed was less than 300 miles, and at full speed the range was halved. Fortunately, they had refueled at the Dongchuo base before departing from the capital. Otherwise, they would not have been able to successfully cross the Divine Spine Mountains and follow the mountains that border St. Varen and Isengard to reach Wolffang Ridge. We're not going directly to Wolffang Ridge. The Son of Flame raised his hand and pulled the joystick that controlled the core power output directly to the bottom. He pointed to the scale of the fuel tank containing liquid magic energy and grinned, let's go around Highland City. We still have enough fuel to support us to try a full-speed voyage. Before Michelle could answer, the power core had already changed from cruise mode to full-speed mode. The low humming sound was accompanied by regular vibrations, making the entire cockpit emit strange clanging noises. Even with the hatch completely closed, the two could still clearly feel the bumps as the airship broke through the wind at high speed. Ha ha ha. The current flying speed can finally catch up with the power of the flying magic. The Son of Fire couldn't help laughing, and turned to look at Michelle, who was huddled in his seat, holding the armrest tightly. Don't forget to record the speed. I estimate it can be close to 100 miles per hour. The airship stumbled all the way, but finally arrived at the Highland City at full speed without any danger. Through the clouds, the city standing on the plain several miles away could be vaguely seen. The Son of Flame narrowed his eyes and suddenly asked, after we completely controlled Highland City, did it absorb many of the surrounding population? Not really. Michelle shook his head doubtfully. As a border city near Langai Ridge, Highland City doesn't have many advantages other than being a necessary transit point on a major trade route. Before he could finish his long introduction, the Son of Flame had already raised his telescope and placed it directly in Michelle's face. He said in a deep voice, look for yourself. The city rose from the plain, its striking ochre walls, and a large number of people gathered outside for some unknown reason. Through the telescope, he could see that most of them were carrying carts and parcels, their clothes ragged and dusty, their number possibly in the thousands. What's going on? Michelle asked, stunned. Are the locals planning to abandon this place and migrate to our country? The Son of Flame shook his head solemnly, picked up the alchemical communicator, and began to contact the Highland City garrison. ZZZ, we've reported to Wolffang Ridge. ZZZ, Iron Hill has been breached. Lizardmen are wreaking havoc around the capital of Isengard. ZZZ, and refugees are fleeing towards the border. The Son of Flame frowned. Did Iron Hill also have intelligence agents? Why hasn't there been any news of the attack? Intelligence gathering in Iron Hill was entrusted to the Stonehurt Priory, a pagan ally of Isengard. While they lacked access to magical computers and alchemical communication equipment, they relied on spellcasters and avian communications to relay information about major and minor events in the capital to Wolfsfang Ridge in a relatively timely manner. The only downside was that their timeliness was slightly slower, often delaying them by several days. ZZZ, Intelligence Agent, ZZZ, Contact Lost, Isengard, a capital of over 20,000 people. Yet, without even a chance to raise a warning, the entire city fell silently. The two men in the airship couldn't help but exchange glances, unable to comprehend the sheer number of lizardmen present in Iron Hill. "I'm afraid Highland City will be abandoned and evacuated soon," the son of Flamesight said slowly. "We don't need to land. Let's just turn around and return to Wolfsfang Ridge." His Majesty's prediction was correct. After seizing the Great Rift in Godspeed Mountain, the lizardmen had indeed marched southward, heading straight for Isengard's capital, Iron Hill. However, we hadn't expected their offensive to be so swift. In less than 3 months, they had managed to penetrate a gap in the 3 existing southward routes, allowing them to move freely. After seizing Isengard's capital, the lizardmen would slaughter innocent mortals and drive the refugees from the northern kingdom southward. The journey would surely be a hellish scene of devastation. To the north of the Evil Moon Mountain in the western border, there is a large tribe of powerful and warlike demons blocking the way, which can buy enough time for the humans south of the mountain to prepare for war. The number 3 floating island was directly sunk in the Battle of Big Bear Lake. The defense line in the middle seems to be stable for now. Next, the Northern Army at the border of Langile Ridge will probably be under great pressure. Chapter 606, Blackwater burns the city. Isengard, the royal capital of Iron Hill. The mighty Chatland River, as it flows through here, carves a vast, twisting bend, slowing its flow. Several vast artificial canals channel the waters into the city, nourishing the heart of the kingdom of Isengard. Once a prosperous and bustling capital, the endless stream of demons gushing from the river has transformed it into a living hell of slaughter and bloodshed. Tens of thousands of lizardmen have silently infiltrated the city through the canals, repeating their old tactics and launching a surprise attack at night. Winged beings soar into the air, spraying black water indiscriminately. Scattered flames quickly spread from the city's outskirts to the interior. Civilians driven from their homes and buildings by the flames were slaughtered by lizardmen ground forces. A single finger-sized crystal spike was enough to easily kill unarmed mortals. The defenders of the outer city of the royal capital had no time to assemble. They gathered in small groups, quickly targeted by the enemy from the air, and then came under a relentless barrage of red light. Some Iron Hill cavalrymen who already lived in the outer city, or knight commanders imbued with bloodline abilities, barely managed to scramble through the chaos with their scattered retinues, converging towards the cavalry encampment and the royal palace. Amidst the city's scattered buildings, a massive dark figure seemed to creep slowly, its steps heavy and unnatural, hidden in the darkness. A ball of fire suddenly erupted from a nearby barn, instantly illuminating the dim city streets. A colossal monster, shaped like a conch, but with a high arch in the middle, as tall as a church bell tower, lifted its twisted legs, so thick that several men couldn't even hold them together, and crushed a panicked warhorse into pulp. What kind of monster is that? An Iron Hill cavalryman trembled, gripping the reins tightly. Clearly no one could answer his question. Uncontrollable fear crossed the faces of the knights and retainers who witnessed this scene. Without needing a command from their superiors, everyone instinctively turned their horses around, desperately urging their warhorses to flee. Faced with this devilish beast that seemed to have come from hell, even the most elite knights couldn't muster the courage to rally and charge it. Inside the palace, Prince Regent Andrew paced anxiously back and forth in the courtyard. A guard stepped forward, bowed solemnly, and said, "Your Highness, the fire in the outer city is so intense that the guards we sent out simply can't reach the Hussar station in the south." Many civilians were driven toward the inner city by the thick smoke, and the guards at the 4 gates are impossible to contact. Andrew gritted his teeth and said, "Those damned northern barbarians. How the hell did they get into the city? Where did they find such a terrifying ignition that could set the entire outer city ablaze?" The guards, looking bewildered, naturally couldn't answer his questions. Andrew secretly regretted that Emperor St. Valen hadn't been making empty threats. If a powerful northern barbarian truly crossed the Great Rift in the Divine Spine Mountains and invaded the southern border, their first target would be Isengard, the Hussar kingdom. Although the exact number of enemies in the city was unknown, judging by their deliberate actions to start fires and create chaos, they were likely not very strong, otherwise they wouldn't have resorted to nighttime fire attack, hoping to cause chaos among the enemy. The Prince Regent felt a slight sense of peace at the thought of the nearly 5,000 Iron Hill cavalry he still commanded. If the two armies were to engage in a battle outside the city, he wouldn't fear any so-called foreign forces. Even if the Pope's Knights of Grace or Alay's Mage Corps arrived, he would be more than qualified to challenge them. Send more men. At all costs, the cavalry must assemble quickly at the palace. On one hand, we must protect the royal family and nobles, and on the other hand, we must wait for dawn to launch a counterattack against the enemy entrenched in the outer city. Andrew was primarily concerned with his own safety. After all, the royal guards and elite knights numbered only a few thousand. Not only did they have to guard the palace, but they also had to help contain the rioters who were storming the inner city. Only a few trusted confidants could truly remain by his side. Before the guards could leave again to mobilize troops, a figure suddenly descended from the sky into the palace courtyard, directly facing Andrew. Bishop Randall? Why are you here at this hour? After the two Inquisition knights withdrew from Isengard, the only member of the Holy See remaining in the royal capital, Iron Hill, was Archbishop Randall. He was also a high-ranking combat priest, and his family had always been close to the royal family, making him a key target for Prince Andrew to guard against in his bid for the throne. However, the archbishop seemed to stay out of the royal family's power struggles, remaining confined to Iron Hill Cathedral and rarely appearing in public, not even once walking around the royal court. "Where is His Majesty?" the white-robed archbishop asked bluntly, not wanting to waste time with Andrew. Andrew frowned, feeling that the other party's tone and expression were a little wrong, and hurriedly said, "Your Majesty is in a safe situation now. Shouldn't the bishop first discuss with me how to quell the chaos and deal with the enemies invading the outer city?" Randall laughed bitterly. "Quell the chaos? Do you know how many enemies are invading tonight? You are not still delusionally thinking that the 5,000 Iron Hill cavalry under your control can easily clear all obstacles for you?" After that, he took out a blood-stained cast iron badge from his arms, raised his hand and threw it directly into the arms of the regent. "The Iron Hill cavalry are trapped in their southern garrison by those alien calamities. Thousands of winged demons and monsters as massive as bell towers have left your proud elite troops powerless." Andrew took several steps back, eyes wide with disbelief. What? The knights have, perhaps a small group managed to break through, but they're also fleeing towards the city." The bishop's cold words were like a slowly tightening noose, suffocating Andrew. Watching the bishop running towards the Mad King's chambers, he couldn't help but mutter, "He's planning to take the king with him, and flee the capital single-handedly." Suddenly, he remembered that, besides Bishop Randall, there didn't seem to be another church leader within Iron Hill who possessed the art of flight. The captain of the guard stepped forward quickly and said urgently, "Your Highness, we also need to evacuate immediately and find a way to break out. Otherwise, we don't even have to wait for the enemy to arrive. The desperate people who are swept into the inner city will drown us alive." Andrew clenched the cast iron badge in his hand and stumbled to the second floor of the courtyard attic. He looked at the sky not far away that was completely lit up by the flames. Faintly, there seemed to be countless twisted figures with flapping wings, shuttling through the alternating light and dark night sky, heading towards the palace. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 607, East and West Fronts. I didn't expect our fiscal and tax revenue growth to be so much better than expected in the fourth quarter of last year. Harvey closed the report in his hand and gave Reiner a satisfied smile. I believe that in the first quarter of this year, the economic data will continue this momentum. For the past year, the North has been plagued by wars of varying sizes, and recruitment has been almost constant. Once military spending and various relief subsidies were opened, funds poured out like a flood. Yet, the year-end summary showed that, far from falling into financial hardship, they had actually become richer and richer. Especially in the winter, population growth and tax revenue increased even more than during the harvest season. Numerous manufacturing industries have sprung up across the kingdom, and the labor force freed from the farmland has poured into the cities, filling the gaps in the factories. In the past, During the bitter winter of St. Valen, located in the northern reaches of the southern border, when the land and rivers froze and the mountains and forests were covered with snow, 99% of the common people would hunker down in their simple homes, relying on fires and the meager rations they had painstakingly saved over the year, struggling to survive until the next spring. If it weren't for the tax collectors wielding whips and swords, they would never have braved the snowstorms and the risk of contracting the plague to leave their homes to repair city walls or perform labor for their noble lords. Ironclad ships and trains, navigating the plains and rivers day and night, defied the wind and snow, completely relieving the plight of snow-blocked roads and frozen rivers. Food shortages and high prices were no longer common across the kingdom. The government built hospitals and free distribution of vaccines and medicines completely allayed the fear of plague and death. More and more people discovered that working diligently in factories, with 24/7 heating, snow-proof conditions, and provided food and shelter, was far more comfortable than hunkering down in their own drafty homes. Moving to the city to work became everyone's primary choice for creating a better future. After the emperor's coronation, Spark City, officially designated the new capital of the United Kingdom, became the preferred destination for these migrant workers. The Ralph River, which runs through the entire kingdom, has become the busiest waterway. Grizzly Castle, the northern terminus, is teeming with people. Numerous Southern Territory chambers of commerce have established themselves there, setting up transit points to stock up on in-demand goods from the Northern Territory capital. Moorings at the docks are so crowded that lines form. Hundreds of people arrive daily, hopping on trains to their ultimate destination, the capital of Spark City. This completely spontaneous, large-scale population migration, unprecedented in the Southern Territories, quickly pushed Spark City's population past 100,000, and after the New Year's plowing season, it approached 130,000. The constant influx of new immigrants needn't worry about finding suitable jobs. With the city's unbridled expansion, the once magnificent old city walls have now been officially designated as the inner city walls. Construction has begun on a new section of the wall, starting from the north. Recruitment is now in full swing, with job booths and notices even hanging outside the central train station, vowing to recruit all the new immigrants pouring into the capital before other factories. Prominent banners can be seen everywhere, with slogans like "Once you come here, you're a northerner and work creates a happy life" echoing through the ears of the public. City Hall, oh no, that should be the Ministry of State now. Reiner, you did a great job last year. Harvey smacked his lips as he gave his final approval to the work report Reiner had delivered. From the old subordinate's metal frame, a slightly comical cackle erupted, the high-frequency resonance of the gears and soul core resonating. For him, no reward could compare to Harvey's praise. Having Harvey personally completed the core upgrade filled him with a passion and drive to serve His Majesty for another 100 years. At that moment, as Dallin and Pierce entered the office, bringing news that immediately soured the atmosphere. So, it is basically certain now that Iron Hill City has completely fallen in the massive attack of the Lizardmen. The chief political advisor nodded, copied the intelligence document in his hand and handed it to Harvey, and explained in a deep voice, the report sent by Wolffang Ridge. According to the explanation of the head of the Stanaherd Hermitage, we have also thoroughly figured out why the intelligence informant who sneaked into the city did not send us a warning message in the first time when Iron Hill City was attacked. This loss of intelligence contact was indeed a self-defeating move. Ever since the Stanaherd Hermitage was officially recruited, their leader, Old Hughes, has been active in various places in Isengard, and has also sent a number of carefully trained spies to infiltrate Iron Hill City as an insider. The problem was that these spies were almost all low-level spellcasters. While they were extremely cautious in their daily activities within Iron Hill, never revealing their identities for fear of being reported by the citizens, who viewed them as heretics, when the Lizardmen attacked, the fluctuations of their magical energy became completely undisguised, conspicuous like bright lights in the darkness. They bore the brunt of the targeted attacks, leaving them with no chance of escape or communication. Fortunately, after the fall of Isengard's capital, the enemy didn't rush south. We still have ample time to respond. Harvey glanced at the suspended Southern Territory chart and pointed to the path of the Chatland River after it passed through Iron Hill. They must have new small floating islands, submerged in the underground waterways along their troop movements. According to the nautical charts, the enemy's next target should be Glenmore Lake, 150 miles north of Highland City. That's the southernmost point of the floating island's submerged navigation within Isengard. a mere 300 miles from the border Wolf Fang Ridge. The winged ones could reach the border defenses in 2 or 3 hours. An ordinary land-based lizardman, aided by small river tributaries, could also launch a surprise attack overnight. Pierce said gravely, "Your Majesty, the current strategic dispute between the military and the general staff is primarily over how to determine the offensive and defensive postures on the eastern and western fronts. To the east, they would capture the mountain kingdom of Yared and deploy troops along the border of the holy city of Garth to prevent a possible breach in their defenses should the holy city be attacked and captured. To the west, Isengard, having already abandoned its strategic depth advantage throughout Isengard, is now forced to retreat to the border Wolf Fang Ridge. Both baskets needed to be filled with troops in a timely manner, while the general staff headed by Isdal intended to stabilize the Langai Ridge area on the western front first, and find a way to push the front line back so as to take advantage of the situation to encroach on some of the neighboring countries' territories. At the same time, the action on the more distant eastern front should be suspended. After all, the church was guarding the front line in Goris, and no matter how tense the situation was, there would be scapegoats to help them delay some time. The military department headed by Pierce was more radical. With sufficient manpower and firepower, they had the idea of grabbing both hands and making both hands strong. They also hoped that the two-front offensive would be carried out simultaneously, and they would not suffer any losses. After listening to their respective opinions and considering them comprehensively, Harvey finally made the decision: if we give the army 3 days to quickly capture Yared in a blitzkrieg, the plan of fighting on two fronts is not completely unfeasible. Chapter 608 Reserve Militia. It was still dark outside, and in the quiet and peaceful village, a sudden burst of hurried footsteps could be heard on the cobblestone streets. Several young men, dressed in thin cotton and linen shirts and bare chests, walked up to a stone house at the entrance of the village and started banging on it. Bang, bang, bang. Bale. Bale. Are you up? The heavy and sturdy door panel could hardly withstand the pounding. Bale quickly opened the door and welcomed the 4 people in. What are you panicking about? The rooster hasn't even crowed yet. Eat your fill before you set off. Then he poured out a few bowls of hot oatmeal porridge from the iron pot that was bubbling in the fireplace, broke off a few pieces of hard bread from the cupboard, and distributed them to everyone. The conscription office will post the notice at 9 in the morning. We only need to set off at 6, and we will definitely be able to enter the city at 8. As he said this, he took out an exquisite copper pocket watch from his pocket and shook it in front of everyone with a proud expression. Don't worry, I'm checking the watch and I will definitely not be late. When he moved to the town, he brought with him 2 prairie firefox furs and several ancestral northern gems. Who would have thought that after going to the city twice with a tribe leader, he actually got some new and interesting things from the state-owned stores that made all the young people in the village envy. The youngest member of the tribe gnawed on the bread and slurped the oat porridge. You can always seize the opportunity if you go early. We are not rushing you. Those guys from the Yanshan tribe are planning to set out from the next town to enter the city before dawn. They are probably almost at the city gate now. Bale suddenly remembered something and asked in a low voice, "Didn't you notify Sek who lives in the village on the opposite bank?" "Humph, that guy is not nice at all. He set out secretly without telling us yesterday and rushed to the city ahead of time." After swallowing the last mouthful of oat porridge, Bale wiped his mouth, took out various documents wrapped in a leather bag from under the pillow, grabbed the kettle and urged repeatedly, "What are you still standing there for? Let's go." Several people walked out of the village quickly and looked at the neat rows of stone houses along the river bank. Many of them had lights on, and wisps of smoke were rising from the chimneys. Those were the early farming tribesmen who were carefully preparing meals. Looking up, the endless expanse of flatland loomed dark in the hazy morning light. Freshly plowed seeds lay buried within, waiting to sprout, a vibrant energy permeating every inch. Continuing along the smooth, wide road, just as Bale had predicted, they arrived just as their pocket watch struck 8 o'clock, arriving inside of Fingin City's towering walls and open gates. Obediently presenting their IDs, they quickly joined the crowds entering the city. Fingin City was vaster than any settlement they had ever encountered, its roads a maze of twists and turns. Fortunately, Bale had been there several times before with the clan leader and knew the exact location of the conscription office. Along the way, they encountered young men heading in the same direction, all seeming to be bound for the conscription office. Naturally, they exchanged harsh glances at these competitors. Recruitment is limited and has specific criteria. Simply showing up doesn't guarantee selection. An ID card and a literacy certificate are essential. Applicants must also be able-bodied, articulate, and at least 18 years old. Even their vision is tested on the spot. Due to these numerous restrictions, only 5 members of the Jade tribe of Jinglintown, Bale, were eligible. The rest were essentially eliminated due to their literacy, ineligible to even apply. Seeing the long, orderly line forming in front of the recruitment office, Bale suddenly realized he'd made a mistake. With over half an hour left before the notice was posted, these people were already lining up. How absurd! He was filled with rage, but he obediently stood at the back of the line, tiptoeing and gazing at the closed door. Soon, the bell tower on the distant street corner chimed. The heavy double doors of the recruitment office swung open, and a non-commissioned officer in a black military uniform hurried out, carrying a roll of documents. Seeing the long queue outside, he couldn't help but exclaim, "Wow!" He didn't waste any time, however. He walked directly to the notice board and posted the recruitment notice. Then, he picked up his alchemical trumpet and began to announce loudly. The United Kingdom of the Northern Territory and St. Valen, the Ministry of National Defense Recruiting Office in Finnegan City, has a quota of 500 soldiers, 300 for the Northern Army and 200 for the Defense Force. Before he finished speaking, he squinted and roughly counted the number of people in the 3 long lines before him. As expected, the number of people exceeded the quota, and selection must be carried out according to regulations. Those who have a completed basic literacy education and graduated with a passing grade, and who have also participated in the 2-week preparatory militia training program within the past 6 months will be given priority for recruitment. Please step out with your militia certificates. Bale quietly clenched his fists, cheered softly, and turned to several of his tribesmen, who also looked delighted. Let me tell you, those 2 weeks of tedious and arduous standing in formation were definitely not just some idle distraction, they were definitely for the upcoming conscription. Immediately, a small number of the men in the group raised their certificates high, beaming as they left a long line, led by the recruiting officer into the recruitment office ahead of time. Without a doubt, they would be prioritized for the prestigious Northern Army, responsible for external warfare. Bale also noticed that walking not far ahead of them was none other than the young chief of the Silver Moon tribe, Sek. He had also participated in militia training, and it seemed he had been well prepared. After completing a series of height and age registration formalities in the conscription office hall, everyone was immediately assembled in the spacious backyard. Gazing at the densely packed dormitories not far away, they all knew they would be spending the rest of their days there. Who would have thought that an officer, also wearing a black uniform and bearing the rank of second lieutenant, would then stand before them with a stern face. A forged metal robotic arm, a terrifying and intimidating presence, appeared. Once you meet the enlistment requirements and complete the conscription registration, you will officially become a reserve recruit for the Northern Army. Everyone will have a full day to travel home, pack a small amount of luggage, and say goodbye to their families. Tomorrow, you must report back by noon and march directly with the main force. Anyone who is late or doesn't show up, HMPH, not only will you be court-martialed, but your family members will also be questioned by the Ministry of Justice. Do you understand? Understood, sir. Everyone had undergone even the most basic militia training and naturally understood the military's principle of strict obedience and strict compliance. If you have any questions, ask me immediately. Zeke, who was standing at the front of the team, raised his hand cautiously. Sir, aren't we going to receive new recruit training here? We will leave with the main force tomorrow. Yes, are we going to the north? Did they mean to send them to the battlefield immediately? For a moment, everyone was nervous. The Iron Arm officer chuckled with some disdain. What qualifications do you have to go directly to the battlefield? There is still at least 3 to 6 months of intensive training time. Those who fail will still roll back in disgrace, and our destination is not the north, but Wangshan County. Wangshan County. Isn't that on the border between our country and the Principality of Yaleed? Chapter 609 Attack. In the glorious Cathedral of Glorious Light, Goris, the City of Grace, a white-robed Inquisition guard hurried into the prayer room, unsurprisingly startling the cardinal, who was dozing on a bench. Ismail closed the tome he had casually spread open and asked slowly, "You look so flustered. Is something going on?" The guard leaned closer and said, "Your Excellency, there seems to be some unusual activity within the Flammahurt Inquisition. Chief Inquisitor Isaiah, despite Monsignor Felipe's dissuasion, insists on joining forces with the Dark Sun Inquisition and marching to Iceanger to rescue Iron Hill, which has been invaded by aliens. Archbishop Randall had warned the holy city of the fall of Isengard a week earlier. Randall, now on his way back, had mentioned that the aliens were known to originate from north of the Godspeed Mountains. They weren't just a horde of fell orcs, but a previously unheard of entity. The incursions into Iron Hill alone numbered tens of thousands, and the mortal knights and armies were simply unable to withstand them. This news naturally caused a stir in the holy city. They had heard for some time that St. Valen's newly crowned northern emperor had led his army in several battles against unknown enemies in the wastelands. However, most high-ranking officials of the church believed that this was merely a routine purge of the numerous fell orc tribes to consolidate their rule and expand their territory in the north. Now, it seemed that they had been the first to encounter the northern aliens, sending their troops on a surprise attack into the northern part of Isengard, seemingly planning to establish a preemptive defense line at the Great Rift in the Godspeed Mountains to block the aliens' advance from the south. Ismail narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "Isaiah may have gone mad. It's too late to rush to Isengard's aid now. Besides, St. Valen is now at odds with us. How can two judgment legions with a strength of nearly 5,000 cross the central southern border and successfully reach the prairie? The emperor of the northern border will not agree to the enemy openly, borrowing the road within his territory, right?" Bishop Amoa arrived just in time and interrupted with a stern face, "If you can't borrow the road from St. Valen, the worst that can happen is to cross the Divine Spine Mountains and go around from the direction of the wasteland, or go south and go east through the Principality of Barclay. After all, Isengard is a country of believers of my lord. It is extremely unwise for your majesty to order the two judgment legions originally stationed there to be transferred. If those two legions were still stationed in Iron Hill City, the capital of Isengard would not have been completely powerless to resist and fall into the hands of foreigners in an instant." Ismail frowned and coughed, dismissing the attendants and guards from the room. He rebuked Bamoya, "You are not allowed to question His Majesty's decision. You should also be aware that the City of Grace is also close to the Divine Spine Mountains, and the Judgment Army's primary responsibility is to protect the Holy City." Bamoya, who already leaned towards the Divine Punishment faction, likely played a significant role in instigating the Flameheart and Dark Sun legions to dispatch. Ismail was well aware of this, but he had no interest in arguing with him. As if by coincidence, at the most critical moment, His Holiness the Pope announced to the three cardinals who held real power in the Holy City that he would enter the lower levels of the Privy Council within the Saints' Gap, where he would spend a year in secluded prayer in a darkened prayer room. This timing, perfectly timed, coincided with the eve of Isengard's alien invasion. The Vatican's high-ranking officials felt as if they had lost their core. The already clearly divided factions within the ruling class were now plunged into complete chaos, each holding their own opinions. The Divine Punishment faction prioritized the Church's influence within the secular kingdoms, and naturally refused to sit idly by while Isengard fell. The hundreds of thousands of followers of the Cavalry Kingdom, along with thousands of churches and parishes across the land, would be devastating if they fell into the hands of foreigners. The moderate faction, however, had always been conservative, having for years allowed a Divine Punishment faction to secretly colluded with the southern kingdoms, suppressing the Union and ordinary spellcasters. It wasn't until the outbreak of St. Valen's corruption that they suddenly realized the alliance they had formed to fight the demons was on the verge of collapse, and the long-awaited peace within the human race was crumbling under their own connivance. This dangerous act of setting fire in their own backyard finally unnerved the moderate faction, and they adopted a rare, tough stance against the Divine Punishment faction. This completely exposed the divisions within the Holy City, and many mid- and low-level high priests and knights of the Judgment, who had vaguely heard of the rumors, expressed varying degrees of confusion and wavering. This decline of faith must not continue. Ismail, always a moderate, was completely uneasy. While the alien enemy was still wreaking havoc thousands of miles away in Isengard, the Holy City's glory could not be allowed to crumble from within. Without the Pope's authority, he must take on greater responsibility and salvage the situation. Bamoa's attitude couldn't be reversed quickly, but Bishop Rivera, a former ascetic, could be won over. Besides the Flameheart and Dark Sun legions, which sided with the Divine Punishment, he also controlled at least 3 moderate judgment legions loyal to the Pope. These forces numbered nearly 5,000, of which a full 30% were elite bloodline knights possessing extraordinary powers. While they were far inferior to the glorious spears, who had been utterly annihilated outside Golden Radiant City, each possessing divine grace, Their long-standing defense of the holy city made them a formidable force. Thinking of this, he stood up, not intending to continue the verbal dispute with Bamoa. Just as he was about to leave the prayer room to look for Rivera, he was almost knocked over by the Inquisition army who rushed in from outside. The person who came was actually rushing to see Bamoa. "Bishop, it's bad. Chief Inquisitor Isaiah is in trouble." "What?" Bamoa, who had just been calm, stood up suddenly with an expression of disbelief. "Didn't he personally lead the army to the northern monastery for a routine inspection?" "What happened?" "It was called a routine inspection, but in fact they were secretly sending troops to the foot of the God's Spine Mountains. They really planned to detour through the northern wasteland and rush thousands of miles to support Isengard." Ismail didn't take the initiative to point it out, but asked, "Did we encounter evil orcs who fled to the southern border, or scattered remnants of the demon army?" The guard shook his head in confusion. "I don't know, but the 500 bloodline knights brought by the chief inquisitor, as well as more than a dozen combat priests, were all killed. Only 8 high-ranking knights risked their lives to break through and rescue the severely injured chief inquisitor. We have also lost contact with the northern monastery." "Seriously injured?" "Where is Isaiah now?" "In the Cathedral of Grace. Bishop Rivera is doing his best to treat him. The 8 bloodline knights who returned with him are also receiving treatment there." Ismail and Bamoa exchanged a glance, sensing that something was amiss. "Immediately notify the other cardinals and Chief Inquisitor Felipe, and have them rush to the Cathedral of Grace to meet with us. Also, completely seal off the cathedral and prohibit any priests or inquisitors who know of this from leaving." Chapter 610 The Eve of Dramatic Change. How could this happen? What had happened to Isaiah's knights at the northern monastery? Ismail found it unbelievable. 500 bloodline knights, imbued with divine power, dozens of them high-ranking, even aided by battle priests trained in radiant healing, shouldn't have been utterly annihilated even against fell orcs and demon warriors outnumbering them several times over. Isaiah himself, before officially ascending to the rank of Knight Grandmaster of the Flamahurt Knights, had been a battle-hardened Inquisition knight stationed in Blackstone City for over a decade. He was Chief Inquisitor Felipe's most accomplished and capable subordinate, and had even single-handedly slain a high-ranking demon priest. They must have been caught off guard by a sudden attack. Could it be that within the isolated northern monastery, isolated outside the holy city, a traitor had forsaken their gods and fallen into depravity? Secretly colluding with those nefarious spellcasters. Despite the unusual and bizarre nature of the situation, the cardinal suppressed his doubts and, in conjunction with Bamoa, who maintained outwardly peaceful relations, decisively suppressed news of the attack on the Flamahurt Knights, preventing a full-blown conflict between the two factions, already on the verge of a split. By the time they arrived at the Cathedral of Divine Grace, Chief Inquisitor Felipe was already waiting outside. Bishop Rivera denied his request to inspect or accompany the injured, forcing everyone outside the prayer room to wait, allowing only the remaining 2 cardinals inside to discuss matters. Rivera was assisted by only 2 mystics in the prayer room. 5 of the 8 severely wounded bloodline knights lay on stretchers, covered in white cloth symbolizing their return to the divine embrace. Isaiah, eyes closed and in a deep coma, was still receiving holy light healing. Both legs were severed below the knees. Though the wounds were well bandaged, the persistent, crimson blood indicated that Rivera's healing had been ineffective. Holy healing is almost ineffective on the judge's broken limb. Rivera rarely spoke on weekdays, but when he suddenly opened his mouth to speak, his voice was a little hoarse. "I found a black toxin that seems to have vitality in the blood oozing from his wound. This unknown substance continues to erode and pollute the blood and divine power in his body, and continues to destroy his originally vigorous vitality." After saying this, he ordered a secret prayer to remove the gauze on Isaiah's broken limb and show the bloody but red and black wound to the 2 of them. The black poison only threatens priests and judges who possess the divine arts of radiance. It's completely ineffective against those who pray without any supernatural powers. Bamoa frowned and pressed, "So, it's very likely a magical toxin developed by the spellcaster specifically targeting us." Rivera shook his head slowly, chuckling self-deprecatingly. "You and I all know that divine arts and magic are of the same origin. How could a spellcaster create something that would destroy itself and dare to display it openly before the world? Perhaps there are some ruthless individuals among them, completely blinded by hatred and dissent." Bamoa knew this was just a forced excuse, fundamentally impossible. Neither the High Council of the 7 Wizarding Nations nor the Spellcasters' Union would tolerate such a self-destructive trend. Ismail sighed, pulled out a palm-sized golden box studded with precious gems, and carefully handed a round pill to Rivera. Seeds of rebirth? His Majesty has entrusted you with the only 2 seeds of rebirth he's refined in recent years, Bamoa said in astonishment, his eyes wide. Ismail waved his hand, unwilling to say anything more. Rivera immediately understood and leaned over to stuff the pill into Isaiah's mouth. Soon, the judge, whose face was as pale as a corpse, slowly groaned. His slightly heaving chest suddenly swelled, and a long sigh, accompanied by a strange gurgling sound from his stomach, escaped from his throat. Then, with difficulty, he opened his eyes, and his gray eyes seemed to immediately focus, fixed on Ismail, who was closest to his bed. The cardinal carefully helped him up and asked directly, "What happened to Yankson in the northern monastery? What enemies did you encounter?" Isaiah gasped twice quickly, and a ball of pink blood foam quickly flowed out of the corner of his mouth. He struggled and growled, let me see His Holiness the Pope. Take me to the Saint's Gap, tell us the truth first." Ismail pinched the other's shoulders and asked with a cold expression, "His Holiness is in seclusion and praying. All affairs of the Holy City are handed over to the 3 of us. I have the right to ask you to report directly to me." Isaiah gradually came back to his senses under the influence of the drug. He raised his eyes and looked at Bamoa standing in front of him. He found that the other party nodded with a gloomy face. Then he gritted his teeth and slowly said, "It's the devil, the disaster devil from the north and the prophecy of God. They occupy the northern monastery diocese at the foot of the Divine Spine Mountains and turned it into a horrible hell in the world." Devil? Prophecies are merely scriptures used to enlighten believers. Ismail's heart sank, and he trembled. Northern barbarians. The northern barbarians currently wreaking havoc within Isengard, having also crossed the Godspine Mountains and invaded human territory southward. Gorith, located in the central southern region, and the northern monastery adjacent to the Godspine Mountains, was naturally one of their targets. But they arrived too quickly. Could it be that Emperor Saint Valen, who had moved his capital to the northern border, had failed to halt their advance? Confused, he instinctively glanced up at Bamoa, then slowly shifted his gaze to the solemn Rivera, only to find his 2 colleagues also stunned. 500 bloodline knights of the Inquisition, along with nearly 1,000 elite troops of the Flame-Hard and Dark Sun, deployed ahead of time. They were unable to mount a single resistance against the Inquisitors, with only the Chief Inquisitor himself escaping, gravely wounded. If this news spread, the Holy City would be plunged into immediate turmoil. How would the faithful, who had always trusted the Church, view them? Whether battling evil spellcasters or battling demons in Black Rock City, the Knights of the Judgment have always presented themselves before their followers as fearless and invincible. Even though the Divine Punishment faction has suffered repeated setbacks in the St. Valen area in recent years, thanks to a strict information blockade, the suspicion and discussion surrounding their defeats have been quickly quelled. We still have 3 knightly orders stationed within the Holy City. So we're not completely defenseless. Rivera pondered for a moment, his voice hushed with difficulty. Ismail nodded, but we still need to report this matter to His Majesty. If necessary, His Majesty will probably consider dispatching his holy prayer guards. That should be the key to our victory. Chapter 611 The Interweaving of Light and Darkness. The group descended the winding stone steps of the Church of Grace, entering the Saint's Gap beneath the earth. After passing through the Privy Council, where the Inquisition was located, they arrived at the deepest, lower-level chapel. A gray-robed chaplain had been waiting at the end of the narrow passage. Seeing the cardinal at the head of the group, he bowed calmly and said, "Your Majesty has been informed of this matter, but only Monsignor Ismail is permitted to enter for consultation." Bamoa paused, looking down at Isaiah, who lay limp on the stretcher. Finally, his expression gloomy, he stopped. Ismail nodded to Rivera and followed the chaplain into the inner chamber. It was not much different from the small chapel in the Privy Council where the Pope usually lived. The rough, smooth stone floor, the dark gray walls, and the 12 quaint brass lamps, which His Majesty would immediately send to wherever he moved, all was accompanying him. Taking a deep breath, Ismail whispered to the gray-robed elder sitting cross-legged in the center of the room, his back to him, "Your Majesty, according to canon and divine revelation, a foreign catastrophe from the north has appeared near the Holy City, and the northern monastery has already fallen." The Pope's hunched shoulders trembled slightly, and his hoarse voice said, "I know, this day was bound to come sooner or later, but it arrived too soon, and we are not yet prepared." Ismail's breathing quickened as he explained, "Your Majesty, rest assured. We still have 3 Knights of Judgment stationed in the Holy City. We are not completely defenseless, and your Holy Prayer Guards are also a powerful trump card. Holy Prayer Guards. The Pope turned his head slowly. His old and wrinkled face seemed more haggard than before. There are no Holy Prayer Guards anymore, Ismail. In the past 30 years, I have dispatched a guard into the depths of the Saints' Gap every month. Once they go there, they never return. The last guard just set off before I officially went into seclusion. The cardinal was stunned when he heard this, and after a long time he said in astonishment, 500 Holy Prayer Guards are all gone. He wanted to ask more, but suddenly remembered the secret rumors about the identity of His Holiness the Pope. His body, which was already stiff in place, suddenly felt an uncontrollable chill on his spine. I know what you're thinking. It's all right. Without the guard's constant and devout sacrifices, I wouldn't have survived this long. The Holy City no longer possesses qualified candidates for transformation. The Pope paused, chuckled self-deprecatingly, and continued, so I had no choice but to take a risk. A few days ago, I personally entered the depths of the rift. What lies deep within the Saints' Gap? This was the answer Ismail had racked his brains to no avail. Only the vague oral traditions of the 3 cardinals who had held real power in the Holy City could reveal a hint of the truth. Since the early days of the Church, the first Pope emerged from the Saints' Gap, claiming to be inspired and blessed by the gods, determined to spread glorious miracles throughout the human kingdom. Since then, each succession of popes has been quietly and systematically accomplished during the interregnum. Over 100 years ago, Pope His Holiness the Zai, sensing his own end, entered the interregnum, and they successfully ushered in His Holiness the Zai, who has reigned ever since. The new Pope, nearly identical in appearance and stature to his predecessor, inherits the wisdom and foresight passed down through the millennia since the Church's founding. He is deeply versed in all the secrets of the Church known to his predecessors, and the divinely bestowed arts he imparts are constantly being refined. He simply appears slightly younger than his aging predecessor. A widely held belief among the Vatican's highest echelons is that there is no such thing as a systematic succession of popes over 10 generations. Instead, there has always been only one pope, a living immortal who, through divine will and grace, constantly receives divine rebirth. At this thought, Ismail suddenly realized something. He stepped back a few steps, then knelt down, his forehead pressed to the ground, and tremblingly asked, You are His Holiness the 14th Pope." The white-haired old man smiled bitterly and shook his head, saying slowly, "I am still myself. God has not given me the revelation I deserve, and after rashly entering the Saints' Gap, he has not responded at all." Did God no longer respond to the Pope's prayers? Ismail raised his head again, his bewildered expression no longer concealed. Disaster has struck the world. Alien races have invaded. They are here to destroy us. The Holy City has absolutely no ability to resist or fight back. Ismail, I order you to gather the remaining knights of the Inquisition who are still loyal to the moderates, as well as the devout priests and pastors who still remain neutral, and lead the people of the Holy City to migrate south immediately to avoid the impending war of destruction. The cardinal felt his heart suddenly tighten, and responded with difficulty, "Your Majesty, abandoning the Holy City and leaving behind the birthplace of our Lord's glory will probably cause a heavy blow to the faith of the entire Church. Besides, where can we escape to? It's better than staying here and waiting to die. Disperse the Inquisition and believers throughout the southern border. St. Valen may not be willing to accept us, but the royal families of various countries, as well as the independent dioceses and monasteries scattered across the country, will all be our future homes." The Pope paused, then soothed the distraught Ismail, "The Holy City's fall is of no consequence. As long as the flame of the Church remains preserved throughout the southern territory, we will always have a chance to rise again. Let us set aside all preconceived notions about faith and truth, and join forces with spellcasters, just as we did over 100 years ago, to fight humanity's mortal enemy." This was the consistent position of the moderates. If it weren't for the sudden rise of the divine punishment faction over the past decade or so, the southern territory wouldn't have been plagued by frequent internal unrest among the transcendents. Ismail's heart ached, and he suppressed his grief as he nodded. "Your Majesty, what about you? You won't be leaving with us." His greatest concern was, of course, the Pope's intention to cling to the Holy City, leading the equally extreme divine punishment faction to perish alongside the impending alien calamity in order to preserve the Church's last shred of glory and prestige. In this case, the Pope's lineage would not yet be complete, and the church would lose the supreme leader it relied on and counted on. The 13th seemed to have anticipated his thoughts. He blinked, a strange expression on his face, and sighed, "Don't worry. Although I'm a useless old man now, I still have some places where I can be of use." He coughed twice, stood up with difficulty, and looked at Ismail with a sharp gaze. "I will carry the inheritance I retrieved from the Saint's Gap and travel alone to the northern border of St. Valen, to plead for aid from the spellcaster Emperor." Chapter 612 Collapse. The walls were filled with a piercing sound of metal clashing, occasionally punctuated by shrill roars. Felipe hurried along a narrow passageway, faintly hearing screams and cries of agony from the front. A group of Judgment Knights, recently arrived to provide support, were met head-on by a targeted attack from the air. A red beam, as thick as a human waist, descended from the sky without warning, slamming fiercely into the creaking, decrepit walls of the Holy City. The Bloodline Knights had no time to raise their shields or form a formation. They were instantly scattered by the earth-shattering bombardment, armor and limbs scattering everywhere, and sticky blood trickled down the steps through the cracks in the brickwork. Several high-ranking priests risked their lives to ascend into the air, but before they could cast divine spells to counterattack, they were pelted by a torrent of black water, which transformed into countless fine, sharp needles, forming a black web that enveloped them. Such a barrage of fire was impossible to avoid. The priest's flesh was pierced like a shredded sack, and before he could even utter a groan, he plummeted to the ground. Immediately, on the dry, hard dirt beneath the city wall, a dazzling display of flesh and blood blossomed. The outer city gate had been completely blocked by countless massive rolling stones and battering rams. The enemy, despite repeated attempts at red light bombardment, failed to breach it. Decisive, they turned and scaled the wall. The Judgment soldiers stationed atop the walls drew their bows and crossbows, leaning halfway over the parapets, fighting back with a desperate, life-for-life attack on the enemy below. Felipe could never have imagined that the peaceful river that snaked along the Holy City, supplying Goris with clean water for centuries, would suddenly burst forth with tens of thousands of devils. These enemies, constantly emerging from the river, now surged silently and swiftly towards the Holy City like a vast, endless black wave. Many of the enemies, even upon reaching the riverbank, immediately unfurled their massive fleshy wings, flapping them and soaring into the air. Before their brethren on the ground could reach them, they launched an assault on the defenders on the city walls. Unsurprisingly, the defenders were met with a first wave of spears from the air. These black spears, condensed from thin air in the enemy's hands, launched with incredible force, capable of piercing even thick iron shields and pinning the inquisitors hiding behind them to the wall. The red lightning that occasionally erupted from their palms was even more bizarre. Each strike blew a hole in the parapet, leaving even the most vulnerable defenders severely burned. A direct hit would undoubtedly result in a horrific shattering of their bodies. "How long will it take for the Radiant Knights to arrive for reinforcement?" Felipe demanded, grappling with his adjutant, who had just reached the wall. The adjutant's lips trembled twice, and he howled miserably, "Your Honor, the Knights of Glory refuse to accept your order for reinforcements. They are now at the south gate several miles away, completing the task of organizing the evacuation of the last batch of believers and civilians. These cowards. Damn traitors." Felipe slammed his fist on the parapet, turned around and looked back at the sparse team that had just assembled inside the city gate. That was the only remaining force of Flameheart and the Knights of Dark Sun. There were less than 500 people. Even if they opened the city gates and launched a charge, facing the tens of thousands of aliens swarming in from outside the city, it would be nothing more than a futile act of hitting a rock with an egg. "Your honorable judge, the outer walls can't be defended. It's better to retreat to the inner city and gather the remaining forces at the cathedral to hold out." Felipe felt as if his throat was choking. After a moment's pause, he spoke dryly, "Have those cowards safely evacuated all the believers and civilians from the outer city?" "They've almost done it. Only a few devout believers, who refuse to leave the monasteries and chapels, have rushed to the walls to help carry battering rams and boulders to join the defense." The task of organizing the evacuation of believers and civilians had been secretly carried out 3 days ago, under the guidance of the moderates. The Divine Punishment faction naturally observed this, but did nothing to interfere or disrupt their plans. In any case, despite their differences, they were all companions of the same faith, each with their own beliefs to uphold and practice. There was no need for a complete and drastic conflict. But now, it seemed that the moderates had long anticipated that they might not be able to hold the Holy City. The early evacuation of the believers was actually a wise move to preserve their strength. Felipe clenched his fists and barked out an order without further ado: hold the wall for another quarter of an hour. At all costs, ensure the wall remains secure. Dispatch a contingent of high-ranking Inquisition knights to hold back the winged devils advancing into the city, buying time for the evacuation. The lieutenant nodded gravely and was about to turn and pass on the order. Suddenly, a sharp, breaking wind rang out beside the chief inquisitor's ears. Felipe had no time to turn back. He instinctively lunged with a tumble. A slender black crystal spear lodged squarely where he had been standing. The angle and force with which it penetrated the masonry sent a chill through him. Just as he was about to twist and stand, the wall beneath him trembled slightly, as if a rhythmic vibration were emanating from its base, or even deeper underground. Before he could recover, an even more violent tremor suddenly struck, catching him off guard and causing him to stumble and fall to the ground again. In the distance, heavily guarded sections of the wall were being defended. The sounds of panic mingled with the chaotic footsteps of the crowd. Before Felipe could rise again, he turned to look at the source of the chaos. Tens of meters away, a massive gap had crumbled across the eastern section of the wall, crumbling to the very base. The towers on top of the wall slowly tilted and collapsed like building blocks, hurling countless defensive equipment into the air before slamming heavily into the city walls. Flying rocks and rolling logs ripped through the empty wooden dwellings behind, sending smoke and dust billowing into the sky. Why had the earthquake struck so suddenly? Before Felipe could recover, a second wave of shock waves from deep underground struck, widening the already cracked wall even further. Hundreds of meters of wall melted and collapsed into the abyssal chasm below. The abrupt appearance of a massive fissure in the ground, stretching across the city walls, stretched like lightning into the city. The monstrous chasm engulfed every building in its path, instantly forming a deep chasm that reached the Cathedral of Radiance. From atop the crumbling walls, the majestic and holy Cathedral of Radiance seemed to teeter on the brink of an abyss. The forced-out pillars at the front of the cathedral, momentarily losing their support from the earth, held out for only a few breaths before slowly toppling downward like a melting candle. Felipe watched helplessly as the rose dome, meticulously carved by generations of skilled craftsmen, lost its pillars. The stained glass windows, housing numerous sacred images, shattered and crumbled like a torrential rain. The Cathedral of Radiance crumbled before his eyes. Chapter 613 Demonized Armor. Thanks to being the tallest building in Spark City, the rising sun from the north always shines down first on the new Union building's rooftops. Standing nearly 100 meters tall, its 16 stories aren't exactly towering compared to the Skyrealm Magic Tower hovering above Alayam. Compared to the intricate and bizarre structures of the Magic City, the square, solid gray structure is unremarkable in design, and even its materials are the same as those of the ordinary 2- or 3-story city dwellings below. But Salas knew full well, this building was constructed purely with mortal skill and strength, while the Skyrealm relied on a nearly century-long levitation array, consuming countless magical stones and precious materials. Perhaps only a unique spellcaster emperor like Harvey possessed the means and power to achieve such a feat, rivaling magic with human power. In some ways, calling him a legend is no exaggeration. After officially relocating to the north, Sarath became even more reclusive than his old colleague Dawson. Dawson had completely abandoned the numerous decisions he'd made in the Union, devoting himself entirely to the research of establishing a new school of spellcasting. Not only did he engage enthusiastically with the newly transitioned soul mages at the Academy of Sciences, he even condescended to accept a special appointment from the Northern Academy of Magic, becoming an unprecedented legendary professor. He taught a weekly course on the in-depth theory of arcane spellcasting, a position even the Emperor's higher-ranking spellcasters gladly attended. Sarath, on the other hand, politely declined the Academy's sincere invitation, citing the depletion of his mana caused by his soul dissociation syndrome as a barrier to movement. He remained confined to the top floor of the Union building for extended periods, only occasionally glancing at the newly established research groups downstairs and offering a few pointers on their magical energy evolution projects. The two legendary chiefs almost unanimously chose to avoid any involvement in the alchemical weapons and artifact research of Harvey's trusted faction, neither actively interfering in any experimental progress nor interfering in any military or political affairs within the United Kingdom. In a sense, this was also a demonstration of their sincerity and obedience by joining the North's camp. This allowed the new union to cast aside past factional struggles and traditional alliances, allowing everyone to participate and contribute purely as individuals, a mutually beneficial outcome. "Where did Lord Dawson go today?" Salas asked casually, summoning a waiter. "He went to the Magic Academy early in the morning. It seemed that he was preparing in advance for a theoretical debate that would take place in the afternoon." Salas nodded and chuckled. "There has been no progress in the research on the magic lizard people, but he is not in a hurry at all." The waiter smiled and bowed. Looking at the chief's bored expression, he approached cautiously and said, "His Majesty the Emperor sent a new gadget he developed last night, saying that he wanted you to take a look at it for him. Maybe there is room for improvement and optimization." Salas frowned and smiled helplessly. "What kind of weird soul creation is this again? His mountain of soul research documents has tortured Dawson enough, and now he plans to harm me? Forget it, bring it to me." Not long after the waiter left, two experimenters came in pushing a small cart. Lifting the cloth covering the cart, he revealed an intricate, delicately constructed alchemical object beneath, yet permeated with an eerie aura. Its layered structure resembled the arthropods of an insect, broken down into several mechanical modules. The joints exposed the internal gear train, and its undulating, smooth lines seemed to echo the muscular structure of the human body. Salas snapped his fingers softly, closed his eyes, and examined it for a moment. He discovered that while it was entirely forged from a specially malleable magical mineral, its interior lacked the expected magical energy. "It's not equipped with a soul core, nor does it rely on a magical power system." He raised an eyebrow at the two experimenters. "Isn't this an alchemical prosthesis for a mortal body?" The experimenter's lips curled up slightly in embarrassment, and he explained humbly, "It was produced in your Majesty's private laboratory. We have no way of knowing its specific function. Your Excellency, please refer directly to the instructions for the photographic magic stone provided by your Majesty." Salas nodded, and after watching the two bow and retreat, he slowly picked up the magic stone that had been placed aside from the cart and tapped it to activate it. The scene that immediately unfolded left him stunned, his mouth slightly open in a look of astonishment. In Harvey's spacious and bright private laboratory, the alchemical instruments were assembled and hung in front of a vertical operating table. A shirtless bloodline warrior stepped forward and stood, allowing two experimental alchemical beasts to wave their arms and apply something to his back and neck and shoulder joints. Then the arm of the vertical console slowly lowered, the alchemical device suspended from it precisely half encasing his body. Salas clearly saw several tiny, sharp probes protruding from it, piercing the vital points of the warrior's spine. Then the entire alchemical artifact tightly fitted the warrior's back, the joints at the shoulders, neck, and ribs automatically locking. The console arm released, and Harvey's familiar, gentle voice emanated from the magic stone. "Soul connection complete, vertebral mental network connection correct. How are you feeling now?" The warrior grinned, offering Harvey an expression of immense trust. He chuckled, "Your Majesty, this thing isn't as heavy as I imagined, but it's a little restrictive. I feel like I can't really use it." With that, he completely freed himself from the console arm's restraints and tentatively took a step forward. His tense leg muscles seemed to twitch slightly from the pressure, but his movements didn't seem slow at all. "Your Majesty, it's getting lighter and lighter. I feel as if it has merged with me, and I can control it." "Shut up, try to raise your arm, and transfer the energy you feel to the activation device on your wrist." Upon hearing this, the warrior immediately raised his right hand in a daze. In an instant, a row of runes suddenly lit up on the scaly alchemical armor embedded in his arm, and a tiny ice blade suddenly appeared from his wrist, spinning towards the steel target erected a few meters away. This is not the innate ability of a bloodline warrior. Salas suddenly widened his eyes, tightly gripped the magic stone in his hand, and poured the surging magic power in his body into it again. Unfortunately, this video display only stopped here, and no matter how he drove the magic stone, it was in vain. This is definitely not the icy body covering ability of a bloodline warrior. Being able to unleash it and transform energy into an external attack, only magic can do that. Salas stared intently at the disassembled alchemical artifacts before him, an incredible thought constantly echoing in his mind. A bloodline warrior could also use this thing to control magic power at will like a spellcaster. Someone. Go to the academy and call Dawson back immediately. I want to go with him to see His Majesty the Emperor. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. we warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 614, Heretical Thoughts. This is the specific situation. Harvey spread his hands and said helplessly to the two legendary chiefs who rushed over, "There is nothing wrong with the theoretical design, but after actual verification, it still has no practical effect. A thin ice blade half the size of a palm, when fired at close range, could not even cut through the army's uniforms covered with optical camouflage coating. It was not powerful at all." Dawson pondered for a moment, then walked to the vertical operating table where the so-called magic armor was hung. Pointing at the densely packed inscriptions on the surface of the armor, he said slowly, "Could it be because there is no soul core installed? Unable to draw enough magic power from the magic network? Naturally there is no way to unleash powerful offensive spells." Harvey shook his head and explained patiently, "The soul core is just a conversion center. It can only release the pure magic energy it carries. In this way, it cannot simulate the attack effects of elemental magic." Salas frowned, and without caring about avoiding suspicion, he asked directly, "If it is not relying on the soul core and does not have its own magic power system, how do soldiers equipped with magic armor guide their own bloodline abilities to cast elemental magic that only spellcasters can learn?" Harvey chuckled, not intending to keep anything to himself. He walked over to the semi-enclosed demonized armor, pointed at the long and precise structure in the middle that was like a mechanical spine, and said softly, "I use soul stitching technology. I extract the souls of creatures that naturally have magical attack capabilities, but instead of converting them into core devices, I directly break them up and integrate them into the entire set of armor. Every rune engraved on it represents a signal transmission connection point." A long list of new and unheard of terms immediately gave Salas and Dawson a headache, as if Harvey and they were not studying the same extraordinary knowledge called magic. They could roughly understand the meaning of each newly coined word, but when combined into a sentence, it was particularly unfamiliar. Soul stitching technology, is it the innovative soul theory used to treat Duncan? Yes, that experiment and the subsequent research gave me a lot of inspiration, which ultimately led to the creation of the magic armor. Unfortunately, the actual results were less than satisfactory. Dawson subconsciously glanced at Saratha and found that he shared the same expression. It was a complex mixture of disappointment and relief. On the one hand, they truly hoped Harvey would achieve this unprecedented feat, but on the other, they were also relieved that his experimental progress had been temporarily frustrated. The advent of magical weapons had already divided the spellcaster's monopoly on controlling supernatural power. If the magic armor continued to innovate, then mortals who could also freely perform various sophisticated spells would no longer regard them as the embodiment of advanced wisdom and power. The spellcasters, as a group of transcendent beings, would be completely dethroned. Seraph's lips moved. He wanted to say something but stopped himself several times, and finally he couldn't help but discuss with Harvey, "What kind of magical creature's soul did you use to temporarily connect with humans? Is it because the species' own soul is not strong enough, which makes the magic it inspires too weak?" Harvey rolled his eyes. "The magic fire source beast is the kind of magical creature ridden by the untamed demon warriors. If this guy, who is as big as an ice mammoth, is considered to have insufficient soul strength, I really can't find any other more suitable reference. The sub-dragon species of magical beasts are already on the verge of extinction in the north and south, and it is impossible to find their traces." Dawson pondered for a moment before seeking their advice. "Perhaps we could contact Gallagher. He's been dealing with the demons in the Evil Moon Mountains for years. As you know, the demons are particularly skilled in taming various rare and precious ancient demonic creatures, despite holding the title of honorary chief of the new federation." Dawson, Salas, and Gallagher essentially subordinated themselves to Harvey, the founder. Since this was his own personal magical experiment, even if the other party shared it freely and openly, when it came to truly participating, it was best to consult with him at every stage. Harvey immediately understood the legendary wizard's intention and smiled, waving his hand. "Not at all. I've been inviting you two to discuss this matter with me. Asking for some additional assistance from Mr. Gallagher would be most welcome." This frank and sincere attitude immediately brought a smile to Salas's face. He raised his hand and asked his personal guards to bring a mithril-coated dressing mirror. Using his unique communication technique, he connected with Gallagher, thousands of miles away. "Ahem. Salas, Dawson, Your Majesty Harvey? What are you three doing? The silhouettes of the black-robed legends in the silver mirror gradually became clearer. Seeing the three of them standing side by side and staring at him with sharp eyes, he suddenly felt a little confused. Why did you contact me suddenly? Are there any unusual movements by the lizardmen on the central defense line? Harvey did not get to the point immediately. Instead, he smiled and greeted, Sir Gallagher, how is the situation in Black Rock City these days? After the church withdrew its troops, we have been living more comfortably in Black Rock City than in the past few decades. I submitted a unilateral request to the Federation to split the regiment in my personal name, but I have not received a reply yet. However, the supplies that arrived in time in the past seem to have been delayed indefinitely during this period. This is also normal. One of the three chiefs suddenly announced the independence of the Black Rock City Mage Regiment with nearly 1,000 people. The other two even quietly ran away from Malaya and defected to the north. The Magic City must have been in chaos by now. Various factions and groups are fighting fiercely for the division of power. How can they have the time to take care of Black Rock City where there was no war? Gallagher paused, tapped the mirror lightly with his finger, and laughed very happily. However, the new annihilation spear sent by His Majesty Harvey, as well as various high-quality precious magic stones, and large-scale material supplies, are already more than enough to meet the daily operations of the independent regiment. Although there is no demon invasion at the moment, we have also completely established a firm foothold north of Evil Moon Mountain, and their frontline central fortress is currently under control. Dawson listened to the boring greetings between the two and could no longer bear it, so he took the initiative to interrupt and said, find a way to get 2 sub-dragon species magical beasts for Starfire City, no problem. What? Sub-dragon species? What are you dreaming about? Gallagher raised his eyebrows and sneered, where can I get sub-dragon species for you? The lair of the demon lord. Salus waved his hand and asked, are there any demon war beasts that are more powerful than the individual strength of the demon fire source beast? How is that possible? Source beasts are untamed war beasts, their bloodlines purer than those of demon hybrids. Their ascended might privately domesticate some mutants, but there's no sign of ascended activity within hundreds of miles north of the Evil Moon battlefield. The demons were suspected to be locked in a fierce battle with the lizardmen in the far north, and the powerful combatants couldn't possibly be deployed south. Harvey sighed helplessly and patiently explained the specific difficulties of the demonized armor research and development project the three had just established. Gallagher was completely bewildered, and after repeated explanations from the three, he finally understood the reason. The souls of the magical creatures used to connect to the armor are not strong enough, which is why the soldiers and warriors can't use powerful magical attacks after equipping it. The legendary warrior, who was born as a battle mage, always looked at problems directly. He blurted out almost subconsciously, then why not peel off some soul fragments from the caster and reconnect them to the caster himself? In the case of self-repair, there will be no rejection and strength problems, right? In this way, the caster will not have to worry about the barriers of magical factions. Arcane mages can practice elemental magic, and necromancers can perform astrological prophecies. It is simply an unprecedented great innovation. The three people on the other side of the mithril mirror were stunned when they heard this, and they couldn't help but denounced in unison, this is simply heresy. Chapter 615 Meeting in the Magic Net. In Spark City in the Northern Territory, at the new Union Building, Salus waved gently, closing the illusory tome floating before him. Turning to Dawson, he sighed, there's no mention of any individual suitable for soul stitching in the ancient tomes of magical creatures, at least not among the extant species still active in the Northern and Southern Territories. Dawson nodded, his eyes still fixed on the magical brain instrument, muttering to himself, I've also searched the magical treasury of the Sky Realm, but I can't find any suitable options. He looked up with a look of melancholy. Tell me, Gallagher's heretical ideas, are they truly feasible? I don't know what's wrong with his brain. He could come up with a view even more shocking than His Majesty Harvey's. Salus smiled wryly. You can tell by the way they're chatting so happily even though they're thousands of miles apart. Perhaps they're just the same type of people, those who never follow the rules and prefer to take unconventional approaches. Unfortunately, although Gallagher shared the same legendary rank as them, he was still primarily a battle mage. When it came to studying profound and obscure principles, he only knew the results, not the reasons. Perhaps he could contact some of the older wizards with extensive collections on the High Wizarding Council and try to find magical creatures suitable for improving soul armor. He opened his mouth, about to offer Dawson a suggestion. Suddenly, an unremarkable brass ring, long worn on his right little finger, glowed unnoticed. A faint surge of magical energy surged from it, and the legendary mage's previously relaxed hands clenched, his brow furrowed in silence. Dawson, also acutely aware of something, turned to look at his old colleague. After a long pause, he spoke hoarsely. "How could, so suddenly?" Salas narrowed his eyes and said gravely, "According to the agreement between me and, since they've initiated contact, I must respond." He turned to the planetary scaled energy focusing array in the center of the room. The massive brass cylindrical instrument continued to emit a low hum. "Dawson, I plan to use this to enter the ley line. I'd appreciate your assistance." While using the energy focusing array's interdimensional connection was certainly more convenient than entering ley line space through meditation, choosing this method meant that every sign of Salas's movements within the ley line would be closely monitored by Harvey, the central carrier. Harvey would then be able to not only track Salas's precise location in real time but also sever his deep connection to the ley line at will. Perhaps he could even directly locate the being Salas had met within the ley line. "Are you worried about the danger of entering the ley line to meet that person? So you're deliberately leaving traces, prompting Harvey to come to your aid when he needed?" Salas, a rare expression of bewilderment, murmured softly, "Perhaps he wasn't here to see me. Otherwise, why haven't I received any signals from him requesting a meeting in the decades since I've been in a lair?" An awkward silence descended upon their lips. Without further delay, Salas walked over to the metal lab table beside the focusing array and lay down, fully clothed, on the ley line connection device. He gently pressed the mask from the metal bracket against his face. The familiar feeling of falling faded in an instant, and when he opened his eyes again, he was already within the vast, empty space of the ley line. Salas gathered his composure and quickly scanned his surroundings, but he saw no other suspicious individuals. They didn't seem to have alarmed Harvey, nor drawn his attention. After all, having roamed the ley line for years, he felt confident that there were many ways to detect signs of surveillance. Moreover, the magic web plane wasn't like the real world, with its physical concepts of direction and distance. Although he knew the area they were currently in was likely completely under Harvey's control, Salas wasn't worried about immediately appearing near his magic pattern upon entering. He truly didn't want to know the coordinates of this magical freak. The brass ring on his right little finger continued to glow softly, its chaotic flickering frequency clearly conveying a constantly shifting coordinate to Salas, as if urging him to proceed immediately. With a soft sigh, he raised his hand and pointed at his own magic pattern floating before him. The once dull, hollow ring suddenly lit up as if electrocuted, and 3 spheres within it, like dead stars, began to slowly orbit. Then, a surge of unparalleled magical energy suddenly emanated from within his magic pattern, spreading rapidly around like a wave. The invisible pressure unique to the legendary rank emanated, startling the few scattered demonic spirits nearby, who swayed their heads and tails and dove into the blood vessels that seemed to be their vessels. Seraph's ethereal form transformed into a stream of light, instantly piercing the now disguised magic pattern and darting off into the darkness of the distant void. A moment later, a narrow sliver of space suddenly opened in the area where he had just stopped. Harvey stepped out, watching the legendary leader's trail of sparks and lightning as he left, his brows furrowed in confusion. The magic web is just wandering, but it's making a bigger fuss than even an emperor's tour. "Are you legendary spellcasters always this arrogant when you're out in other dimensions?" He tilted his head, pondered for a moment, and muttered to himself, "Could it be that Lord Salas created this scene specifically, just to alarm me and draw my attention, but he was currently in the middle of a critical experiment and couldn't leave any time soon, let alone following him on a magic web tour with an uncertain destination? Tisk, never mind. It's best to stay out of the hustle and bustle of legendary spellcasters." Shaking his head somewhat disinterestedly, Harvey turned and plunged back into the slowly closing spatial rift. Immediately, the magic pattern behind him slowly emerged, eerily, as cold and silent as a full moon. The pattern structure, expanding to an immense size, directly squeezed and distorted the surrounding magic network pipes, completely encroaching on this previously seemingly empty area. Following the positioning coordinates transmitted by the brass ring, Salas changed direction 3 times and finally arrived at the designated location. This area looked unremarkable. Even the dense magic network pipelines were a little sparse. There were no naturally existing spatial rifts around, nor were there any signs of roaming spellcasters in the short term. A gray-white humanoid figure was quietly suspended not far away, without a sound, and no magical fluctuations could be seen from it. Salus manipulated the magic pattern to slowly approach, revealing his own illusory projection. After a moment of silence, he slowly bowed to the other party. Long time no see. Teacher. Chapter 616, Signal for Help. Long time no see, teacher. The gray-white figure gradually became clear in Sarath's sight. Pope Zai, dressed in a gray priest's robe and with a haggard face, nodded slowly and smiled back at him, saying, "It's been a long time since we last met, Salus." He paused, looking at the brass ring that the legendary wizard always wore on the little finger of his left hand, and sighed, "No matter what happens, I always believe that you will abide by the promise we made to each other. Now it seems that you have not let me down." Salus felt uncomfortable with this small talk after nearly 50 years of meeting. After a pause, he spoke directly. "Do you hope to use my relationship to speak directly with His Majesty Harvey?" The Pope nodded very frankly. "You and I both know that the Church cannot resist the premature alien disaster. The Federation cannot cope with it either. Apart from this spellcaster emperor who sits in the north, I have no other target to seek help from." Hearing this, Salus raised an eyebrow, and his tone was full of sarcasm as he spoke. "So, teacher, you are finally willing to admit that your approach of betting on both sides, whether it is the Church of Light, or the Federation, has actually failed, right?" The Pope was stunned, but showed no anger. Instead, he calmly explained, "I founded the Union. If I hadn't seized Pope Zai's authority, the Southern Territory would have been decimated by endless internal strife by now." Without even waiting for the invasion, Salus couldn't help but take 2 steps forward and demanded, "But after you seized the Church's power, you haven't brought lasting peace to the Southern Territory. The Church's divine punishment faction remains rampant, witch hunters are even more prevalent, and aristocratic spellcasters, like fence-sitters, mercilessly persecute their colleagues at the Church's behest. Many secular kingdoms, under the Vatican's instigation, openly and covertly exclude and isolate independent spellcasters within their borders, cultivating a negative image of them as cold, arrogant, and unsympathetic in the minds of the people. The so-called peace treaty between the Church and the Union, however, harbors undercurrents stained with the blood of countless innocents. Indeed, I thought that by leveraging the Church's influence to pressure independent spellcasters, I would have them align more closely with the Union and serve you wholeheartedly. I never imagined that this would instead lead to the rise of the divine punishment faction, which had been secretly accumulating strength within the Church." He paused, then spoke with a hint of resignation. "By the time I realized the root of the problem, I was already in a critical situation of declining magical power. Simply relying on the Church's secrets to sustain my life was already too much for me to sustain, so how could I have the time to mediate the conflict between you and the Church?" Salus opened his mouth, the word hypocrisy on the verge of slipping out, but it turned back in his throat several times before he forced himself to swallow it back. As the founder of the Spellcaster Union, his teacher hadn't chosen to intervene against the then Pope Zai to resolve the internal conflict between the two. As the last remaining legendary spellcaster of the Southern Territory since the Dragon Wars, he had dedicated his life since founding the Union to the pursuit of the demigod realm, yearning to achieve a being who could transcend the planes of life while remaining mortal. Unfortunately, his hopes were thwarted. After many adventurous attempts, he came to the realization that the path of magic alone seemed futile. The ironclad reality of his previous existence left him with no clear path to follow. Meanwhile, the subtle signs of his magical power waning, and the astrological predictions of his approaching lifespan all urged him to take a desperate gamble and find a way out. Consequently, the 12th Pope, rumored to possess the Vatican's forbidden ritual of rebirth, became his chosen target to replace and usurp his identity. Thinking of this, Salus tilted his head to look at the haggard old man before him, a trace of gloating pleasure rising in his heart. It seems that even the forbidden divine arts of the Church cannot prolong the lifespan of mortals indefinitely. Teacher, your body is still inevitably showing signs of decay, and the magic within your body is even more. He suddenly paused, frowning in disbelief, and said in astonishment, "Teacher, the magic veins in your body." The Pope shrugged and said gently, "They have long since decayed and degraded, and eventually disappeared from my body completely. Now I am an ordinary person, completely unable to cast magic and divine arts. Apart from the precious knowledge accumulated over 200 years, even my life is coming to an end." But I didn't just sit back and do nothing. At least after the St. Valen plague incident, I did my best to suppress the momentum of the divine punishment faction for you. Otherwise, even if the Spear of Light was completely wiped out in Golden City, Bamoa and Felipe would most likely send 2 more Knights of the Judgment Army to avenge it, or even instigate the ice-angered royal family to take the opportunity to use troops against you. No wonder. Salas had a sullen face and did not speak, but his thoughts were turning rapidly. No wonder that in the several conflicts between Harvey and the Church, the Holy See strangely chose to retreat and avoid frequently. Almost every time the Divine Punishment faction suffered a setback in St. Valen, it did not launch a counterattack, which invisibly gave the new northern regime many opportunities to breathe and develop. He pondered for a moment and said, "We are not surprised that the Church cannot resist the lizardmen. But it seems unnecessary for you to ask His Majesty Harvey for help, knowing that the Holy City could not be defended. You should have decisively left the Divine Punishment faction as cannon fodder to resist the alien offensive, and bought enough time for your own direct and trusted confidants to evacuate. If I'm not mistaken, you will then arrange for them to move to independent dioceses located in various parts of the southern border, and reaccumulate strength to seek a comeback." Salas's tone was filled with uncontrollable anger, until he finally took a deep breath and questioned in a deep voice, "Teacher, you are obviously a spellcaster like us, and you believe in the way of magic where wisdom and truth coexist. But why do you now value the inheritance and future of the Church more than the real Pope back then? In the past 100 years in charge of the Holy See, have you really witnessed the illusory gods descending to the world and spreading gifts and glory to the world?" The Pope smiled wryly and shook his head, listening silently to his only student's relentless beating. Suddenly, as if realizing something, he raised an eyebrow, interrupting Salas's unending rant. "You want to know the specific reason? Haha, I think His Majesty Harvey, whom I'm meeting for the first time, should be able to explain it to you." As soon as he finished speaking, Salas felt a familiar voice suddenly speak from behind him. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to eavesdrop." Harvey gently raised his hand and restrained Salas, who was about to turn to look at him. He gently reminded him, "Sir Salas, for some unspoken reason, I suggest you do not look back at me at this moment." He then turned his gaze to the gray-robed elder in front of him and noticed that since his appearance, the other man had wisely sensed some danger and had simply closed his eyes. Harvey chuckled, his fingers twitching on Sereth's shoulder as he abruptly explained, "Your teacher, the founder of the Union. He probably didn't properly handle the fusion of souls when he devoured the 12th Pope, ultimately leading to his own uncontrolled infection by the Pope's soul fragments. By the time he realized something was amiss, it was already too late." Chapter 617 The Shocking Truth. Though his eyes were tightly shut, Pope Zai managed a forced expression of self-mockery. "Your Majesty, Harvey, is right. Facts have proven, the ancient soul fusion ritual is not without flaws. I was completely unaware when I devoured the previous Pope, and by the time I realized my soul was being infected, it was too late to reverse it. It was precisely because of this that the 2 previously independent souls of transcendent beings gradually merged over time, becoming indistinguishable from each other through the mutual infection, ultimately becoming a single, fused mental entity, a highly intertwined blend of thoughts, memories, and even consciousness." Pope Zai, in turn, completely shed his role as the founder of the Union, ultimately replacing his predecessor as the heir to his faith. Harvey shrugged and chuckled, "You probably don't know yet, but the flesh and soul fusion ritual I taught Master Sereth ultimately caused the chief considerable suffering, nearly trapping him to death in the hidden passages of the demonic web." Sereth snorted, but offered no further explanation. The Pope frowned, unable to resist chiding him. "When I left, I repeatedly warned you that this ancient ritual of merging flesh and blood with spirit is incredibly dangerous, never attempted unless absolutely necessary." Sereth shook his head, explaining impatiently, "Teacher, how do you know I haven't encountered any serious problems? If I hadn't suffered from the soul dissociation syndrome for over a decade, which has drastically shortened my lifespan, I wouldn't have rashly attempted such a dangerous ritual." Harvey tilted his head, realizing that within Chief Sereth's lineage, the rupture of the master-disciple relationship seemed commonplace. Not only did he and his teacher, the current Pope, seem to be on edge, but his student, Mr. Son of Fire, also seemed to be at odds with him. Was this a part of their lineage's tradition of love and hate between master and disciple? Raising his hand and patting the chief's shoulder, Harvey immediately shifted the subject to the key point. "Should I call you His Holiness the Pope, or Mr. Founder of the Federation? It doesn't matter. My real name is Friedrich Calvin. I'm afraid no one in the Federation knows it now." Your Majesty, feel free to call me whatever you want. Harvey nodded and explained in a gentle voice, Sir Calvin, I didn't follow Sir Salus all the way here. As a mortal body that has completely lost its magic power, you should be relying entirely on something on your body to achieve the cross-dimensional shuttle between the real world and the magic network space, right? He paused, fixed his eyes on the old man in front of him, and continued, and this thing you carry is of great significance to me. Even if I am in the magic network space, I can sense its existence anytime and anywhere. Harvey was almost certain that Calvin intended to use the strange properties of this thing to use Salus to lure him to meet him. Calvin smiled upon hearing this. Yes, Your Majesty's guess is absolutely correct. You should call it a magic core, but for the Church, we prefer to call it a fragment of inheritance. A fragment of inheritance? Harvey raised an eyebrow and pressed, You mean, it was supposed to be a whole? Calvin's lip curled with interest, teasing, Of course, when Your Majesty devoured the other fragments of inheritance. Didn't you learn this specific truth from the ancient memories you inherited? After my race stole the inheritance from the center of the continent, to prevent the other races from discovering it, we united with 320 dragon chasers to divide it into 12 portions. We delivered them to the 12 remaining human tribal leaders, brought them back to the southern border, and hid them secretly. Harvey's heart skipped a beat, and he said in astonishment, A stolen inheritance. He finally understood why the other party had repeatedly mentioned following the laws. Aggregating and completing is the essence when they had devoured the magic core buried deep beneath the divine spine mountains. These so-called magic cores, originally fragmented by human intervention, naturally attract each other, actively gravitating towards the remaining fragments and seeking to converge. No wonder he could clearly sense Calvin's location within the magic network. It was essentially the other core he carried that was causing the problem. Calvin, however, seemed unaware of the specific events that unfolded after Harvey devoured the magic core. Instead, he spoke up, Your Majesty may not understand the specific value of the inheritance fragments, but judging by the changes in your own magic patterns, you should understand their significance to a spellcaster. The power of rules is not something a short-lived species like us humans can easily control. Blindly devouring will only lead to the infinite expansion of your spiritual anchor. Once you reach the limit of your capacity, I'm afraid it will trigger a violent collapse, ultimately resulting in the annihilation of your soul. The limit? Harvey instinctively turned back to gaze at the vast magic pattern hovering silently behind him, expanding infinitely, as vast as a full moon. The surface of the star's polyhedron was constantly expanding and bulging, countless irregular angles and corners emerging. Its immense size was squeezing and distorting the already sparse magic network pipes around it. After devouring the first magic core, it had indeed begun to slowly expand in size. Every time Harvey connected to a freshly forged soul alchemist beast through Starfire City's vast energy-gathering array, or established a mind connection with a newly born energy-absorbing beetle, the magic pattern would swell even more, capable of directly creating an artificial spatial rift in the magic network plane, concealing it within. But Harvey didn't feel he was approaching any limit. Both his mental power and magic power were almost always in inexhaustible and perfect condition. The mental anchor within the magic pattern was always as stable as ever. Connecting and controlling millions of energy-absorbing beetles at the same time was a piece of cake. Forcefully suppressing his doubts, Harvey asked Calvin in a deep voice, So the lizardman's invasion of the south is for the inheritance fragments? Calvin spread his hands and nodded, Indeed, once the fragments begin to reassemble, they will immediately sense their presence. Reclaiming the stolen inheritance is imperative. Harvey was stunned by these words. The lizardman's arrival wasn't a sudden or premeditated invasion by a powerful race at the heart of the continent. It was because he had accidentally swallowed the first inheritance fragment, triggering the irreversible aggregation rules that had alerted them. He had actually caused all the crises threatening humanity's survival? Chapter 618 agreed. As you said, the inheritance fragment in the Vatican's possession carries with it the power of the rule known as rebirth. Harvey pondered for a moment. Salus, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke up. Since you replaced the previous pope specifically for this core of rebirth, why are you in this state now? Could it be that even the inheritance fragments can't elevate your life? Calvin smiled wryly and shook his head. After Harvey read the massive magic pattern, he finally opened his eyes. The method of using the inheritance fragments has long been lost over millennia. Even the descendants of the 12 tribal leaders who originally acquired them are probably now extinct. Church texts record their acquisition at the end of the Dragon Wars, and centuries of research have only uncovered a handful of their properties. The creation and transformation of demon slayers and holy prayer guards primarily relied on the fragment's properties, becoming a powerful force upon which the Vatican relied. If I'm not mistaken, the creation and release of many of the Church's divine arts in recent decades are also inseparable from the contributions of the Heritage Corps, right? Harvey narrowed his eyes. There seem to be traces of magic woven into them, suggesting that you too rely on drawing pure energy from the magical web and transforming it for your own use through special methods. Calvin nodded self-deprecatingly, chuckling. Ever since Your Majesty's paper revealing the principles of Bloodline Knight transformation was published, we suspected you might have noticed this. While innovative divine arts incorporating magical principles have indeed greatly increased the Church's combat power, they also subject us, like spellcasters, to the same inherent restraints when facing alien enemies. He spread his hands and spoke to Harvey sincerely. Goris is currently under attack from aliens. Although the Divine Punishment faction fights desperately, determined to perish alongside the Holy City, I predict the entire city will fall completely within 5 days at the earliest. By then, the tens of thousands of believers and ordinary worshippers slowly evacuating the Holy City will likely be pursued and slaughtered by the aliens. In exchange for this fragment of inheritance held by the Holy See, I request Your Majesty to send troops to rescue us. You don't need to retake Goris, just temporarily halt the enemy's advance and give us ample time to evacuate. Before Harvey could respond, Sarath suddenly interrupted. Master, I'm afraid you're not only seeking to borrow our strength to help your followers escape, but also to use the enemy to weaken the United Kingdom's manpower. The demon lizardmen besieging the Holy City must be coming from the vast tidal river beneath Goris, which runs through the Godspine Mountains. Using this natural troop transport channel, the aliens could easily cross the natural barrier and enter the southern border. Closing this gap, the United Kingdom would have to pay a huge price to barely achieve it. The casualties involved are not to mention the astronomical cost of strategic supply and resource transportation alone. The ripple effect would undoubtedly affect the border defenses of Isengard and the Ice Sea front thousands of miles away. He leaned over to Harvey and whispered, Your Majesty, please consider this carefully. Taking over the mountain kingdom of Yared and leveraging the terrain for defense is clearly more advantageous to our cause than sending troops to Goris to stop the demon lizardmen. Harvey pondered for a moment, then looked up at Calvin and said, Since Your Excellency believes the Vatican can hold out on the Holy City for at most 5 days, let's make an agreement. After you hand over the inheritance core, I will immediately send reinforcements. However, the United Kingdom will not serve as the main combat force in Goris to directly engage the enemy. Whether this buys enough time for the ordinary believers in the city to evacuate, depends on the resolve of the Divine Punishment faction remaining there to fight to the death. Calvin paused, puzzled. Then how will Your Majesty proceed? Without your vast magical army, relying solely on the less than 10,000 judgment troops stationed in the city, even with an equal number of remaining believers, we simply cannot contend with the influx of these invading aliens, then cut off their reinforcement route. Harvey waved his hand decisively. I know where they came from, and how they quietly crossed the Divine Ridge Mountains to launch a surprise attack on you. As long as we cut off that underground secret passage, even if the winged creatures can fly over the chasm and continue to move south with their abilities, I believe their number will not be too large. You naturally have ways to deal with their small forces. After that, he no longer hesitated, and raised his hand directly to Calvin and said, Then, Sir Calvin, you can now hand over the inheritance fragment to me as a proof of your sincerity in reaching our agreement. Calvin sighed, knowing that there was no way to say anything more, and said with a bitter expression, No matter what method you plan to use to reinforce Goris, I can only choose to believe it unconditionally now. Your Majesty, please abide by the agreement between us. Salas slowly retreated behind Harvey, preventing possible accidents for him. Pope Zai, with his hunched frame and aged features, raised his hands, clasping them against his chest in an embrace. Then, a translucent crimson prismatic gem slowly emerged from his body. The size of a vertical spindle, its surface gleaming with an unusual luster, as if polished and carved by a craftsman. As soon as the magic core, or rather, the fragment of inheritance, appeared, Harvey felt an indescribable longing surge from deep within his spiritual anchor, as if instinctively driving him toward it. Without further ado, he raised his hand and pointed, drawing the core, suspended in midair, toward him at high speed, before silently sinking into his chest. Salas asked in astonishment, Your Majesty? Has the process of devouring and merging been completed? Harvey shook his head and smiled. How is that possible? I'm merely containing it temporarily, using my mental power to isolate it from myself. We'll consider further matters once we return to the real world, in a safe environment. He then looked back at Calvin, noticing that his projection within the demonic web plane was gradually blurring. It seemed as if the connection to the otherworldly dimension would soon be severed, and the projection would completely disintegrate. Is there anything else you wish to tell me, Your Holiness? Calvin's lip curled as his figure gradually faded, but he turned his gaze to Salus. Without the inheritance fragment, I will never be able to enter the demonic web again. Salus, this may be the last time we meet. Seeing Salus's expression still stern, he sighed and continued, even after trying everything, I still can't escape my fate as a mortal. Perhaps this is simply the way the world works. I hope you won't make the same mistake I did. Teacher, where will you be next? Salus finally spoke with difficulty, but he didn't respond to Calvin's request. Calvin paused briefly as he was about to disappear, then chuckled softly, there's no need to look for me anymore. Do your utmost to help His Majesty Harvey fight against fate. Humanity has long thrived, hoping to transcend the mortal world and pursue the difficult fate of truth. Chapter 619, Dissenting Opinions. Harvey and Cyrus escaped the magical web and returned to the real world. Dawson, having received instructions in advance, had already summoned all the kingdom's higher-ranking officials to the palace, and an emergency meeting immediately commenced. Despite Dawson's preliminary hints, when Harvey and Cyrus finally arrived and detailed the events, the expressions of most of the high-ranking officials dropped. The senior military officers attending the meeting even stood up and kicked over their stools. Minister of Population Management, Orange Peel, who had just completed a new round of recruitment in the Southwestern Kingdom with the Ministry of National Defense, panicked and knocked over the tea served by the waiter. He glanced helplessly at General Pierce, seated at the head of the table. He saw that, while his expression was somewhat grim, he at least remained composed, and his anxiety was temporarily relieved. As the ruler of the kingdom, Harvey didn't conceal the crucial truth about the alien invasions that had resulted from the fusion of inheritance fragments. In truth, if he hadn't spearheaded the project to explore the core of magic, the United Kingdom wouldn't have achieved the dramatic advancements in magical technology it did, much less a foothold in the embattled southern region. The relentless harassment and suppression from the Church and its vassal kingdoms alone would have been overwhelming, let alone the prosperity they enjoy today. The kingdom's higher-ranking officials present were all fellow travelers firmly tied to Harvey's ship, those who had gradually gained real power and shared in the kingdom's lucrative growth. Naturally, they couldn't pin all the blame on the emperor alone. So, despite the unexpected revelation, they subconsciously began to consider their next steps and how to further expand the kingdom's interests. Reiner, Asdalin, and Pierce's thoughts were unquestionable, and the reactions of the others were largely within Harvey's expectations. Harvey's original vision of a united front against the aliens was to unite the secular governments of the southern territories, the Old Union, and the 7 wizarding nations to the utmost, while also easing tensions with the Church and drawing the dwarves, elves, and even the sea folk onto the same page, uniting them as a united force. If possible, he even considered recruiting the demons, currently locked in a fierce battle with the lizardmen, to hold the enemy hostage north of the Evil Moon Mountains in the west, thereby breaking the awkward situation of the southern territories being attacked from all sides. However, once Seraph detailed the historical origins of the magic core, the inheritance fragment, and the Church's willingness to voluntarily hand it over in exchange for reinforcements to the holy city of Goris, the initial skepticism of most of the kingdom's higher-ranking officials immediately gave way to outright resistance. Always attuned to Harvey's wishes, Reiner immediately explained that the Ministry of State had just completed its overall development plan for the new year. Whether it was the East Expansion Base, which was entering its second round of development, or the upcoming mechanized farming initiative in the kingdom's southern border, funding was needed for industry, education, and scientific research. The military had just received a hefty annual budget, and the finances were currently stretched thin. In short, there was no money available. Seeing the kingdom's chief minister taking the lead in resisting, the Ministry of National Defense quickly backed down, stating that the IC base was currently being frequently harassed by the lizardmen, requiring the rotation of numerous garrisons and the deployment of war reserves to be continued without interruption. The border defenses between the kingdom and Isengard also needed to be strengthened and secure. The southern border had just undergone a round of military expansion, and the new recruits were currently training in Wangshan County on the border with the Principality of Yared. They wouldn't be ready for combat deployment anytime soon. If we rashly split our forces into Goris, the Papal Kingdom, and directly engage the massive number of lizardmen, it would likely deplete the remaining defensive lines, completely disrupting all previous strategic plans. Compared to the sharp stance of the two kingdoms' highest authorities, the other heads of government expressed a more moderate stance. Minister of Construction Haru stated that the Southern Territory is currently intensively constructing a transverse railway line, directly connecting to the northern capital. The line would run from Spark City in the north, passing through Grizzly Castle, Sancha Town, Fingidun City, and Jinhu City, ultimately reaching Silver Pine City on the border of Barkley in the west and continuing south to Black Mountain Port, which borders the Principality of Pharos. Construction on the project just began in the spring. If the project can be completed within a year and a half, it may save considerable manpower and material transportation capacity, achieving greater efficiency with less effort. Newly appointed Minister of Agriculture, Ambich Kenny, cautiously pointed out that food price caps and a ban on sales had just been enacted in the new year, and there were currently no plans to import large quantities of grain from foreign countries. Food reserves might be stretched by sudden military action. If word spread, the people of the southern cities, already far from the kingdom's core power, might face an uncontrollable food shortage panic. Chris, who also served as Minister of Industry, didn't explicitly state it, but the 24/7 factories in the Royal Capital Industrial Park clearly indicated that military manufacturing and logistics production had reached their limits. In short, each department had expressed their own opinions and suggestions, offering all sorts of bizarre and far-fetched reasons. Their message to the Emperor was unanimous: Your Majesty, please consider carefully. Do not use your own capital to benefit the Church, the kingdom's long-standing enemy. The other spellcasters involved, including the two legendary chiefs, were independent advisors who ostensibly refrained from interfering in the kingdom's affairs. Seeing that the leading chief advisors, as Darren and Duncan, remained silent, they could only remain politely silent. An urgently convened meeting and discussion suddenly reached a deadlock. Harvey sat on the throne above the stairs, looking speechlessly at the kingdom's higher-ranking officials below, who were arguing with each other. Suddenly, his eyes met with the Minister of Propaganda, Ash, who was huddled in a corner at the bottom. After a brief silent exchange, Ash immediately understood what he meant. He stood up and asked with a smile to the military officials led by Pierce. Wasn't the plan to send reinforcements to the kingdom's western front, occupy the mountain kingdom of Yalad, and finally station troops to besiege the holy city of Gorasaki strategic deployment that the Ministry of National Defense insisted on promoting? Why can't we send troops to rescue them now? Pierce's face was gloomy, and he tilted his head without answering. Dave, sitting behind him, ignored Vaughn's tug and abruptly stood up, angrily barking, How can attacking the church and the lizardmen be the same thing? Why should we send troops to rescue these shamans who have always opposed us? He tiptoed to finally see the arrogant individual who dared to taunt him, only to discover that it was none other than His Majesty's childhood friend, Ash. He choked on the second half of his words, his tone shifting from fury to gentleness. You, the Minister of Propaganda, are in charge of us. Oh no. Mr. Ash's proposal might be worth discussing. Chapter 620 The Final Decision. Alright, stop arguing. Harvey raised his hand and knocked on the throne armrest, and the conference hall suddenly quieted down. He stood up from the throne and walked down the stairs. I know many of you don't want the kingdom to send troops to rescue the church. You feel like you're being used as a pawn. Upon hearing this, the senior military officials of the Ministry of Defense lowered their heads and remained silent, clearly having hit the nail on the head. But we have been planning to send troops to the holy city. What difference does it make whether the enemy standing opposite us is the church, or the demon lizardmen? Harvey turned his gaze to Pierce and others who were sitting upright, chuckled and sneered, or, compared to the church that has been defeated by us many times, you are obviously more afraid of the powerful and unpredictable alien races. Pierce stood up immediately after hearing this, touched his chest and lowered his head and said, Your Majesty, the military has no such intention. No matter whether it is the church, the southern nobles or the demon lizardmen, as long as your sword points, we will not be afraid to face any enemy. Vaughn and other officers behind him also stood up, pounded their fists on their chests and said in unison, The Northern Army will never fear any enemy. As long as your Majesty gives the order, any obstacle in our way will be cleared. Harvey nodded, waved his hand to let the people who had just been provoked sit down again, and said slowly, "In the past, you managed a piece of isolated pioneer territory in the north for me, and everyone did a very good job. Later, we built a brand new city. Everyone in the city hall and the military was enterprising, until today. The United Kingdom was officially established. We are facing powerful alien races from the north, and the situation in the south is also undercurrent. Why are you starting to hesitate and stand still?" He glanced around at the heads of various tribes sitting at the head of the long table, and did not criticize anyone by name. Whether it is the evil Moon Mountains thousands of miles away, or Ice-angered in the east, or even the frozen sea wasteland we need to face ourselves, these 3 lines of defense were all planned and proposed by us, and it is also everyone here who is responsible for their specific implementation. Since you have chosen to help me govern this country together and choose to shoulder the heavy responsibility of the survival of the human race in the south, you should understand that the greater the power, the greater the responsibility. The retreat and refusal of some today indicate to me that some of you are unfit for the position at the heart of the kingdom's power, unworthy of my entrusting this heavy responsibility. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone present froze. Reiner and Asdalen immediately stood, touched their chests, and apologized. "Your Majesty, please forgive our cowardice and hesitation. The Ministry of State will always adhere to your will." The others followed suit, bowing their heads in apology, saying, "Your Majesty, please forgive us for overstepping our authority just now." The longer they followed Harvey, the more the United Kingdom grew in power, and the more those at the top of his pecking order understood the terrifying power they wielded. The kingdom's rapid growth inevitably fueled these higher-ranking officials' insatiable desire for power. Upon reaching the pinnacle of secular power, no one would voluntarily retreat or be demoted due to incompetence. Without a doubt, they all knew that only by unwaveringly obeying the emperor's orders and acting in accordance with his will could they preserve everything they possessed. Otherwise, the tightly knit political clique within the hall would immediately and ruthlessly expel them from the heart of the kingdom. Seeing their composure subside, Harvey waved his hand, motioning for them to sit down. "I'm not here to hear you repeatedly pledge your allegiance to me. The questions and difficulties you raise are not groundless, but they're no reason to hinder my plans." With that, he returned to his throne on the steps and put the meeting back on track. Sending troops to rescue Gowras is imperative. Everyone should understand that today, I require each of you to come up with practical solutions to address the obstacles to this plan. If you can't, ask yourself if you still have the right to sit here and address me. The 2 squads of guards flanking the emperor immediately raised their heavy ceremonial staffs and slammed them to the ground. A resounding bell-like sound echoed through the hall, sending a chill through the officials below. Pierce Asdalen. "I want a combat force totaling 5,000 people, composed of a mixed group of army corps, artillery-independent regiments, and airship-independent regiments. It must be assembled within 3 days and be ready to go in Wangshan County on the western border of the kingdom." "Is there any problem?" Pierce was startled and quickly stood up and saluted, saying, "No problem. Your Majesty." Reiner Floyd. "When will the military funding support and material allocation from the Ministry of State be in place? Can the logistics allocation arrive at the same time?" Reiner stood up without hesitation and said, "In the case of emergency conscription, when will the army set out and when will the logistics be in place?" Harvey nodded, knowing that it was normal for the allocation of materials to be slower than the arrival of troops. He slowed down his voice and added, "Yes, I can give you half a day more time as wiggle room." Then he turned his gaze to the 2 heads of the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Construction. "If the current grain reserves in the southwest of the kingdom are not enough, immediately apply for allocation from the southern border general warehouse in Fingaden City. The railway construction project will be temporarily slowed down, and all the workers will be mobilized to assist in water transportation to supply the border." Kenny and Harry responded in unison, "As ordered, Your Majesty." "Chris, the industrial sector will immediately suspend 50% of its civilian and export production plans. All skilled workers will be gathered to focus on weapons and ammunition production. During this special period, additional salaries will be allocated to workers working in 3 shifts to encourage them to expedite their progress." "Excellent," Harvey chuckled, turning to Ash, who was huddled among the officials. "Your Majesty, do not worry about the propaganda. After this meeting, I will immediately instruct the writers to rush their manuscripts. A supplement will be published throughout the kingdom tomorrow morning, telling the people about our glorious deeds of sending troops to the holy city, rescuing the believers and resisting the alien invasion." Without waiting for Harvey's nod, the Son of Fire, who had been sitting behind the two legendary chiefs and eager to try several times, finally seized the opportunity and stood up, giving him a rather comical, non-standard military salute. Your Majesty, will the independent regiment of aerial combat mages be the main force in this holy city rescue operation? Our speed airships, and bombing airships, can finally show our strength, right? Harvey narrowed his eyes and nodded in response. Yes, I really don't plan to deploy too many ground troops in this operation. On the one hand, the urgency of time does not allow us to retreat slowly. On the other hand, the long-range firepower coverage of the magic cannons, combined with the air support of the bombing airships, can better kill the enemy's manpower. He paused, and said in a deep voice, our ultimate goal is not to regain control of the holy city for the church, but to use the newly developed high-yield magic bombs of the military factory to completely destroy the underground secret passages used by the demon lizardmen to invade the southern border, and block this gap independent of the three-way defense line. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 621, Giant Cannon. Wangshan County, situated on the western border of the United Kingdom of the North and St. Valen, has been undergoing nearly a month of new recruit training since Bale and Sek, members of the Wilderness Tribe, arrived from Fingigan City in response to the military call-up. These days have been even more unforgettable than the 20 years they spent on the grasslands. It's said that Wangshan County was originally a barren aristocratic fiefdom on the border of the kingdom, governed by Leon Waters, Count of Westwind. Due to its sparse population and low tax revenue, even tax collectors were reluctant to stay permanently, let alone dedicated vassal knights to lead a garrison. This led to Wangshan County being plagued by perpetual banditry from the surrounding mountains. After the autumn harvest, bandits were often spotted within the county, pillaging villages and towns like locusts. By the time the Lord, upon receiving the news, slowly dispatched troops to clear them out, the bandits had already retreated back into the mountains. It wasn't until the Emperor officially ascended the throne and dispatched the Northern Frontier Army to reclaim and liberate the entire kingdom, relocating the local population to the more secure Silver Pine City. Wangshan County became a completely deserted and desolate place, eventually being developed into a large military settlement and war zone on the kingdom's western border, with the county capital naturally becoming the core garrison fortress. Regularly, new recruits from across the land would arrive. Along with these bewildered and curious new recruits, they also brought a steady stream of weapons and equipment, along with vast quantities of military supplies delivered via alchemical vehicles. Bale and Sek would often see something incredible, new weapons they had never seen in Fingigan City, new weapons that even the veterans who were in charge of their training couldn't explain. Of course, what impressed them most, besides the terrifying officers who occasionally appeared at the recruit barracks, a perfect fusion of flesh and machine, were the bloodline warriors rumored to have been transformed by the Emperor himself. Back in their homeland in the northern deserts of Isengard, they had witnessed the heroic prowess of these God's chosen warriors firsthand, a senior officer named Wayne, capable of single-handedly overturning several robust recruits charging at him. His movements rivaled the mightiest hyenas and bison of the desert. Even more terrifying, he could easily imbue his scimitar with a searing flame, slicing through foes with the effortless grace of a blade cutting through grease. The rumors of the God's chosen warriors were not groundless. Baylor and his companions had simply never imagined their numbers. Within the fortress of Mount Wang County, at least 500 of these terrifying transcendent warriors were assembled. Baylor, Zeke. What are you still standing there for? Go to the logistics camp quickly. I heard that new weapons have arrived. Come with us to see the excitement. The new recruits of the same period did not reject this group of foreign barbarians who migrated from afar. They would always pull a few of them aside to ask questions and inquire about their deeds in helping the expeditionary force fight against the lizardmen in Isengard. They would always gather together to discuss anything. And there was a sign that they were nominating Baylor and Zeke as the leaders of the small group. It's nothing more than some assembly parts for airships. Didn't we just go and see it a few days ago? Zeke closed the literacy manual in his hand, curled his lips helplessly. Don't dream of flying into the sky all day long. That is an air combat regiment that only spellcasters are qualified to join. You might as well practice riding more and carefully maintain your new gun. Bale pulled him up from his new military bed and advised with a smile, "New recruits are only issued 200 rounds of training bullets per week. Even if you rub sparks out of the gun barrel, you can't improve your marksmanship in a short time. Go with him and take a look. Anyway, there's still more than an hour before the afternoon training." The group rushed to the logistics unloading area and found that many soldiers had gathered there. The unloading area did not prohibit soldiers from watching. Whenever weapons and supplies were delivered here, both construction workers and new recruits would line the road to welcome them and lend a hand to help unload, as if everyone had endless energy. This time, dozens of square-headed alchemical camels arrived at the unloading area. Each vehicle towed a massive flatbed truck. Its 4 sets of wheels plowed deep furrows into the smooth gravel, indicating the immense weight of its cargo. The trucks were covered with canvas, making it difficult to immediately identify their contents. However, rumors circulated that the cargo had been transported from Jinhu City along the Ralph River by armored warship, landing at a transit port dozens of miles away for land transport. This must have been a significant undertaking. When the logistics officer in charge of registering and unloading the cargo directed several soldiers to lift the tarpaulin, the onlookers were stunned. This thing truly looked bizarre. The first item lifted and unloaded by the alchemical beasts was a strangely shaped steel support, roughly a symmetrical triangular diamond shape with a removable shovel-shaped support at the rear, seemingly designed to be inserted into the ground for added stability. Just by watching the creaking steel cables hoisting it, one could tell it wasn't a component of the airship. It was too heavy, likely made entirely of pure steel. While its specific purpose was unclear, it looked unremarkable besides being unusually heavy. But after the tarpaulins of dozens of subsequent vehicles were removed, the soldiers gathered to observe a faint sense of awe. A 4 to 5 meter long metal cannon barrel, securely fastened to a cart by steel cables. Despite their nearly identical appearance, the barrels were so large they could practically fit a head inside, and the curves of the barrels were so smooth they formed a seamless whole, with no visible signs of welding or splicing. Baylor, Sek, and the others were well aware that the kingdom's steel-making expertise was at its peak, surpassing even Isengard, renowned to the south for its gold smelting and iron forging, in sheer glamour. Yet, the lustrous texture of the barrel clearly indicated it was cast entirely from fine steel, a feat unbelievable. It required countless repeated smelting and firing processes, countless hours of iron casting and hammering, not to mention the sheer volume of hollow tubular form required. Such astonishing skill. By comparison, the standard magic rifles prized by the recruits, rumored to be the new Type 2 from the Jinhu City military factory, immediately seemed a bit underwhelming. Several of the new recruits from Grizzly Castle, clearly seasoned veterans, exclaimed in amazement, "This is definitely a high-end product from the Royal Capital Military Factory. Only His Majesty's Royal Military Factory could produce such a formidable cannon." Baylor and Sek exchanged glances, simultaneously wiping the sudden burst of sweat from their foreheads. This thing was definitely not meant for airships. Chapter 622, Heavy Troops Gathered. At the command post of the Wangshan County Garrison Fortress, all the high-ranking officers who had rushed there were discussing the upcoming battle. Ground firepower only needs to cover the designated bombardment points north of Goris. We can handle the enemies who have already entered the city and are engaged in battle with the Church's Inquisition. The Son of Flame repeatedly pounded the table to emphasize to Pierce, "You can rest assured. The air combat mages of the Independent Airship Regiment will not fail. As long as we can destroy the entrance to the underground river deep in the Saints Gap, the remaining demon lizardmen will be sitting ducks for us." Pierce looked hesitant, deliberating for a moment before slowly speaking. "It's not that I don't trust the air combat mage's ability, but based on the intelligence reported by all parties, there are at least 30,000 demon lizardmen besieging Goris, and there are thousands of winged ones as well. If we don't use intensive artillery fire to suppress them, I'm worried that the bombing operation will be hindered." As he spoke, he raised his hand to call Vaughn, activated the magic stone of the photo sent back by the frontline reconnaissance airship, and showed it to everyone. "Look, this is the latest kink beast that has appeared among the demon lizardmen. It is as big as a 3-story building. A group of 3 or 5 can crash down a tall city wall. There are also black water spray holes on its back for air defense. How can you guarantee that you will not be entangled by the winged creatures and then be exposed to their locked shooting?" The newly developed high-speed airship can indeed perfectly avoid the winged creatures who rely solely on their physical bodies to take off in terms of cruising altitude and flight speed, but its safety is not foolproof. Once it needs to descend in altitude and enter the bombing preparation mode, it will also need to face the flying enemies that swarm up in groups. Whenever it needs to hover to fight back, it will immediately enter the air defense range of the ground enemy. With only 2 mages on a single airship, it is almost impossible to survive. Although the bombing mission was not affected during the battle, this extreme one-for-one approach was absolutely not allowed by Harvey and the kingdom's high-level officials. No matter whether they were combat mages or experienced veterans, they could not be easily sent to the front line as consumable cannon fodder in this blocking battle. In order to completely suppress the chattering son of flame, Pierce took out a military order stamped with Harvey's seal from his arms, and repeated the reminder in a stiff tone, "Mr. Holden, although you are currently one of the strategic advisors of the Army Mage Corps and also serve as the commander of the Independent Airship Regiment, I still want to remind you. His Majesty's order gives me the authority of Commander-in-Chief on the battlefield, which means that everyone must execute it unconditionally, and there are absolutely no exceptions." The Son of Flame shrugged and immediately softened his words. "Of course I obey the orders given by the commander, but have you considered? In this huge holy city, there are currently at least nearly 10,000 church judges and devout believers stationed, relying on various fortifications to fight the enemy tenaciously. If artillery and airship bombardments indiscriminately cover the entire city, he naturally doesn't care about the life and death of the judges. But those mortal people, who are equally numerous, will not be able to escape the tragic end of perishing together with the demon lizard people." When stationed in Black Rock City in the past, the Sons of Flame had also experienced the task of rescuing surrounding counties and towns and protecting the evacuation of ordinary people. Most of the time, the spellcasters remained true to their original intentions and tried their best to avoid causing large numbers of casualties among innocent people. Pierce chuckled and muttered, "Didn't you always despise those church clerics? Why are you sympathizing with them at this critical moment? His Majesty has specifically instructed us that our primary mission is to destroy the exit of the underground river, buying time for the church forces that have already evacuated the holy city. Disregard everything else. Focus on inflicting maximum enemy casualties." The Son of Fire nodded in understanding and pressed the issue. "After the bombing mission is complete, if the enemy scatters and flees, do we need to pursue them?" "Flee," Pierce sneered. "Without the floating island fortress and subsequent supplies, where can they escape? The special forces ambushed around the holy city will naturally mop them up, ensuring that not a single one is missed." After the black water was exhausted, the enemy possessed only a tough, naturally magic-resistant shell. To the bloodline warriors, each armed with a bolter and standard weapon, they were nothing more than fleeing prey in the mountains and forests. The two chatted briefly about the specifics of tactical execution until Wayne hurried in from outside the command post. "Commander, we've received a communication from the front line that 3 mixed artillery battalions have arrived at the designated combat location, and they can begin operations as early as tomorrow evening," the Son of Flame asked in confusion. "Our ground forces went straight through the territory of Arid without encountering any obstacles along the way? Did it the damn guy, Earl of Westwind, vow to launch a counterattack on St. Valen?" Wayne sneered and said lightly, "It was just a certain order of the Knights of the Inquisition of the Church that gave him the courage to dream of a counterattack. After the Holy City was attacked, that order had long since evacuated the arid capital of Rilka. Earl of Westwind was so scared that he quickly gathered the country's troops and planned to retreat to the capital to defend it. The Mountain Kingdom already had a small land area, and its entire territory was not even as large as the Grizzly territory. After Earl of Westwind returned to the country and ascended the throne, he firmly grasped the feudal power in the country. There were not even many vassal nobles assigned around the capital, let alone the great lords with their own troops stationed everywhere. A mixed force of nearly 5,000 Northern Army troops entered the country without warning. Leveraging the swift off-road capabilities of their alchemical vehicles, they quickly crossed the mountains and arrived near Goris, avoiding populated mountain villages and towns along the way. They encountered virtually no resistance, effectively a smooth advance, reaching their designated battle site in just 2 days. From Harvey's official order for the operation, the Northern Army assembled 2 regiments, totaling nearly 6,000 men. In just 3 days, dispersed combat units from Jinhu City and Yinsong City arrived quickly aboard ironclad warships. Numerous airships transferred from Fingigan City to Wangshan County were assembled overnight, their airbags only needing to be inflated for immediate takeoff. This scale of emergency mobilization was enough to make everyone realize the terrifying power of the United Kingdom's war machine operating at full speed. I understand. Now that the ground forces are in place, I'll go down and prepare them so that the independent airship regiment can depart on time tomorrow afternoon. The Son of Flame nodded, bowed slightly to Pierce, and departed decisively. Pierce suddenly called out to him, smiling and reminding him, Mr. Holden, don't forget, our operation is code-named Skyfire. Chapter 623 The Art of Aerial Combat. The next morning, the independent airship regiment, comprised of aerial combat mages, finally received the order to depart. Following tradition from Black Rock City's Unholy Moon battlefield, the Sons of Fire gathered all assembled battle mages and reiterated the primary objectives of the operation. Each bombing airship is equipped with only 3 high-explosive bombs. You must not pull the trigger to release the bombs until you reach the designated bombing location. The map of the Holy City, exchanged from the church, had long been memorized by the mages. Deep within the Saints' Gap of the Grace Cathedral lay the underground passageway from which the lizardmen continuously emerged. According to the plan, the only thing they needed to do was to completely demolish the magnificent priestly church of Gorus. The resulting chain reaction would be sufficient to completely destroy the structures beneath it. The massive rubble and debris would also completely seal the entrance to the secret passageway. Captain Holden, all personnel are in place, and the final pre-takeoff checks for the airships are complete. We're ready to depart. Michelle, a former necromancer, was now the Flame Child's second in command. The speeder airship they piloted was also responsible for providing cover for the bomber crews during this operation. The independent airship regiment, comprised of 300 aerial combat mages, was divided into 50 independent formations. Each formation consisted of 2 speeder airships as wingmen, supporting a bomber airship. A dozen high-level spellcasters were also incorporated into the formations, tasked with rescuing damaged comrades who were forced to land. While the new airships had a standard load limit of 2 to increase cruising altitude and speed, they could still carry at least 3 more for the high-speed return flight after dropping and clearing their cargo bays. Thousands of new recruits and engineers gathered at the makeshift airship landing pad behind the fortress command post. Many, aware of their spellcasting identities, bravely removed their caps and waved enthusiastically. This was a strange sight the Sons of Fire had never encountered in their decade-plus of combat. Mortals, possessing no extraordinary powers, not only fought alongside them but also treated them like comrades and companions, hoping for their safe return and mission, offering unreserved blessings and encouragement. The battle mages present were also swept up in the enthusiastic atmosphere, returning the greetings somewhat awkwardly. Some waved, some saluted with the ancient wizard's ritual, and a few even responded with unstandardized military etiquette. Ground forces are on standby, we're moving now. Michelle slid into the airship's cabin and took the lead, his hands gripping the joystick in front of him. The magical power core, already activated and preheated, immediately began to rev up. The low hum grew stronger, causing the entire cabin to tremble slightly. Soon, the speeding airship, equipped only with beam anti-aircraft weapons, rose high into the sky before the crowd's gaze, hovering in the blazing spring sunlight. A crackling voice echoed from the alchemy communicator, "Clear airspace ahead, please set sail immediately." 150 airships quickly took off, quickly forming up as planned. After a quick coordinate check, they adjusted their angles and sped towards the holy city of Gorus. The airship fleet, cruising at high speed, crossed the small mountain kingdom of Yared in a straight line, the entire journey surprisingly smooth. In less than 3 hours, they successfully crossed the border of the Papal States and could see the distant outline of the holy city of Gorus. Even without the aid of telescopes, the battle mages high in the sky could easily locate the primary target of the operation, the City of Grace. It looked as if it had been split in 2 by an invisible axe. To the north, smoke and black fog billowed everywhere, clearly indicating that the invading lizardmen were spraying black water and burning buildings. To the south, there was a relative calm. Only a few iconic church buildings rose with smoke, indicating that they were under concentrated enemy fire. The black mass of demonic lizardmen gathered around the city walls was almost innumerable, and the giant conch beasts mingling among them were conspicuous even from above. From afar, the tens of thousands resembled a writhing black tide, surging through the gaping breach in the holy city's northern wall, each one vying for the inner city. The Son of Fire had always deeply detested the church's actions. In the past, even if he stumbled upon them, he would have resisted attacking them, mercilessly strangling them without revealing his identity. Seeing their current fate, he felt only joy, believing this end was pure retribution for their past evil deeds. Yet, he also knew that in this city of faith, beyond the detestable charlatans, there were also many ordinary, innocent people, poor laborers conscripted from all over the land, children and orphans secretly abducted and offered as tribute by the nobles, and spellcasters and betrayers long imprisoned in the Inquisition. When the Church's high command fled the holy city en masse, these people would definitely not be swept along. They would surely be treated as worthless and ruthlessly abandoned in the city on the verge of destruction. A crackling sound emanated from the communicator, a request for action from the ground forces in the rear. The Son of Fire took a deep breath, raised his hand and patted his deputy, Michel, who was concentrating on controlling the airship. He immediately understood, and with a sharp pull of the joystick, the front of the airship dipped slightly, diving forward under its own weight. The bombing airships followed closely behind, and the airborne forces, like a flock of birds, received the command and began to imitate the charge of the leading flagship. The rapid descent brought a distinct sense of weightlessness, unbearable for the mid-level mages who had never flown physically. Michel pulled a hand over the windproof goggles hanging from his neck, a subtle sense of joy rising in his heart. Even though he hadn't reached the advanced level, he could now enjoy the feeling of flying freely and at lightning speed. As the flight formation drew ever closer to the holy city, the city's buildings became increasingly visible to the mages. Some of the winged beings, flapping their wings at low altitude, were the first to notice the flock of birds descending from the sky overhead. They flapped their flesh wings and turned to look, gathering blackwater spears and red light in their hands, ready to strike back. The Son of Fire unleashed the weapon joystick beside him, instantly activating the beam weapon mounted on the front of the airship. A dense stream of beams suddenly erupted from mid-air, scattering like a fine web of light as it barreled down upon the enemy. The nearest enemies, unable to escape, were instantly engulfed by the web, their bodies instantly chopped into several pieces, falling to the ground in a bloody mass. Then, the speeder airship at the forefront of the charge suddenly lifted its head, its angle instantly shifting from a dive to a pull-up. Less than 300 meters above the ground, it slid in a silky arc, swooping back into the clouds. The bombing squad, which had been hiding behind its wingman, finally revealed its invisible fangs. Bombs. Chapter 624 Indiscriminate Bombing. The high-explosive bombs, originally mounted externally on the underside of the airship's gondola, instantly released with a flick of the joystick. Freed from their restraints, they traced a brief parabola, driven by the inertia of their dive. Then, driven by the immense force of gravity, they plummeted towards the shattered remains of the Cathedral of Grace directly below. Filled with compressed liquid mana and dragon flame powder, the solid bombs weighed over 100 kilograms. The metal shells, clashing violently with the air as they plummeted at high speed, emitted a strange, sharp whistling sound, instantly drawing the attention of the enemies gathered on the ground. Compared to the shadows cast by the cluster of airships, painted in optical camouflage, the round bombs were inconspicuous. Even the dozens of slow-moving conch beasts failed to notice them. The black water spouts, rising high from their rugged backs, were aimed directly at the airships, which had just completed their bombing and were struggling to gain altitude. Whoosh, 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 streams of thick black water shot skyward, quickly congealing in midair into thick, sharp black spikes. They narrowly grazed the undercarriages of several bomber airships before slamming heavily into the distant city buildings, sending up huge clouds of dust. And the next moment, the first few bombs, released from the air, roared and slammed into the vast army of demon lizardmen surrounding the cathedral. Amidst a frenzy of the black aliens, a blazing red flame suddenly erupted. The precise impact point of the bombs was almost impossible to discern. The rising flames, mixed with the thick fog of the black water explosion, obscured vision. Vast, vacuum-like craters were immediately cleared from the massed enemy group, reducing everything around them to ash. The shockwaves of the explosion spread rapidly in all directions, tearing apart the demon lizardmen that collided head-on, sending their limbs and black and red bodily fluids splattering like ink. The concussive force of a single bomb rippled across a radius of only 100 meters. Enemies further away, fortunately taking cover, escaped destruction. However, the subsequent explosion triggered a chain reaction, collapsing vast swathes of the city. Countless shattered masonry pillars barred the eldritch swarms that were unable to escape, completely blocking the already narrow streets. The intensive bombardment lasted less than 2 minutes, but the bombs unleashed a devastating blow on ground targets. The massive chasm that once stretched between the inner and outer walls of the city wall was filled in by the continuous tremors, barred by the collapsing buildings on either side. The already crumbling Grace Cathedral collapsed inward, its central nave crumbling inwards, its towering spire plunging headfirst into the deep crater below. Looking down from high above the clouds, the designated bombing site, centered around the Grace Church, was almost completely shrouded in a cloud of smoke and dust. Only the central area could be vaguely seen to have sunk several dozen meters, completely filling the internal void below. Airship pilot Michel lifted his goggles and glanced down. Mr. Holden, can the saints gap be closed like this? The son of fire curled his lips, a look of satisfaction at the results below. It should be possible. As His Majesty said, if we can't close it off in one go, we can just try again. It'll just take the time to return and reload. The facts clearly prove that, whether it was a speedboat or a bomber airship, after increasing its speed and cruising altitude, the enemy's winged ones were completely out of reach, and the entire bombing mission could be carried out with minimal hindrance. A single strike hit the target, then quickly disengaged from the elevated speed, regaining speed and circling, indeed, completely evading enemy pursuit. This was the art of aerial warfare that the Emperor had repeatedly expounded upon them. This resounding bombardment was truly a devastating blow to the lizardmen. But it was also a nightmare for the remnants of the church, who were now pulling back their defenses and concentrating their forces to engage the enemy in street-level battles. Most of these divine punishment church inquisitors and devout believers had retreated to the city buildings further south, far from the bombing of the Cathedral of Grace. But the swarm of airships descending from the sky and the earth-shattering tremors that followed a bombing shattered their already despair. Unsure whether the attackers were friend or foe, the bombing's effects felt like divine retribution. Looking northward, the cathedral, once a symbol of their faith, collapsed in an instant. Hellish flames mingled with soaring smoke and dust, driving the already numerous enemies even further south. Black water splattered, blood and limbs splattered, the agonizing screams of the wounded. The relentless collapse of buildings and violent explosions shattered the last vestiges of their tenacious resolve to defend the holy city. Praying to the gods was now futile. The brutality of this alien siege and the subsequent, sudden bombardment were beyond their comprehension and common sense. Thus, the last remaining believers and Judgment Army began to flee southward in an uncontrolled manner. At first, it was a handful, but as the feeling of abandonment spread, the flow toward the southern gates gradually grew larger and larger. Before these remnants could reach the outer city walls, representing a new hope of life, the piercing roar of death echoed from the distant sky once again. From dozens of miles away, the Northern Army's ground bombardment units finally launched their artillery barrage. Shells pelted the holy city like a torrential downpour, transforming the vast, majestic city into a massive target stretching dozens of miles. The indiscriminate bombardment razed every remaining building, sweeping across the city's skyline like a massive scythe. The once paradise on Earth had finally, at this moment, been transformed into a living hell on Earth. The bombardment had lasted for nearly half an hour. Following the instructions of the reconnaissance airships, hundreds of heavy magical naval guns gradually adjusted their firing angles and launched a gradual bombardment. Although the new artillery had completed dozens of test firings in the royal capital, when it came to actual combat, most soldiers realized they had underestimated its terrifying range. The first 3 rounds of range adjustments had yielded reconnaissance feedback indicating that the impact point was too far away. This meant that the concentrated fire at the highest elevation angle had actually passed directly over the holy city and struck the distant mountains and forests. Fortunately, the bombardment formations possessed a meticulously calculated range chart. Although the impact point was unseen, thanks to the instantaneous feedback from reconnaissance airships, they could quickly adjust their angles and renew their fire, even from dozens of miles away. This unprecedented mode of warfare left the artillerymen tasked with carrying out a mission bewildered. Without having to witness the target, nor endure the pressure of close combat, they could completely destroy tens of thousands of enemy troops through tedious, repetitive actions. The hasty pre-battle assembly, and the hastily written wills before the battle seemed a joke, weighing heavily on the minds of all the soldiers, never to be mentioned again. Their only companions were the synchronized roar of artillery fire that echoed across their positions every 40 or 50 seconds, and the whistling of shells as they sped away. Chapter 625 Mess. As night fell, Vaughn hurried into the command post clutching a stack of battle reports. He saluted Commander Pierce with a fist. "General, this is the report from the front. A copy has been sent back to the capital for His Majesty." Pierce nodded, took the document, and began to carefully examine it. The Air Force had already returned to the Wangshan County base by dusk, and the artillery positions over 30 miles away in Goris had just concluded the bombardment. 50 new style magic cannons, after 6 hours of continuous bombardment, had consumed nearly 20,000 shells delivered to the front lines, effectively crushing military budgets in this battle. In fact, if it weren't for the overheating caused by continuous firing, and the compromise of the artillery positions to adopt an alternating firing method, the ammunition consumption would likely have been even higher. As for the number of casualties, they can be completely ignored. The lack of casualties among the ground forces was expected, and the air combat mages carrying out the bombing mission were also very cautious. During the entire operation, only 2 high-speed airships failed to raise their altitude in time due to improper operation during the bombing process, resulting in them being pursued and entangled by the winged creatures. But fortunately, the high-level spellcasters in the team took action in time and rescued the pilots before the airship crashed. It's impossible to count the results of the battle. Vaughn scratched his head in annoyance. The number of demon lizardmen killed in the Holy City is countless, and that doesn't even include the subsequent reinforcements who were buried alive after the complete collapse of the Saints Gap. Our reconnaissance airships could only observe from afar, unable to observe and count them up close. Moreover, both the men knew full well that a large portion of these heads were likely contributed by the church. Based on the intelligence they exchanged with the church, they were well aware that at least nearly 10,000 church inquisitors and ordinary believers were stranded in the city before the bombing began. According to oral reports from the reconnaissance airships after returning, after the indiscriminate artillery bombardment had first blocked their only escape southward, over 1,000 of them died from the trampling among themselves at the ruins of the city gate. Many more were killed by the fleeing demon lizardmen. With both sides' retreat cut off by the Northern Army, the vast city of Goris became a living cage, a real hell of blood and fire. Many winged ones managed to escape the Holy City, but soon, exhausted from their black water and red light energy and unable to resupply from the nearby floating island fortresses, chose to descend to the surface and hide temporarily. This played into the hands of the pre-ambushed special forces. With their combined force of bolters and sniper rifles, it was only a matter of time before they were completely wiped out. A large number of lizardmen ground forces, unable to enter the Holy City, turned and fled north after the sustained bombardment, Vaughn explained, pointing to a map spread out on the table. We suspect the well-flowing river north of the Holy City may be a branch of an underground river. While it won't allow the enemy's floating islands to pass directly through, it will allow them to transport troops, Pierce hummed and casually asked. Send someone to blast the upper reaches of the river. It won't be easy for these guys to climb out of the abyss without water. Vaughn nodded and decisively turned to make arrangements. Harvey also received a battle report from the front at about the same time. After a quick scan, he summoned Reiner and Asdalen. Hiss, 20,000 rounds of artillery shells, Your Majesty. If I remember correctly, that's nearly all the ammunition reserves of Silverpine City and Golden Radiant City's defenses, with an additional 10,000 urgently transferred from the capital. The constant flow of transports, airships, and armored ships, it's a bottomless pit of military expenditure. Reiner counted on his fingers, his words filled with anguish. A long-range firepower strike beyond anyone's imagination, coupled with lightning-fast airstrikes. The costs and resources required were also beyond anyone's expectations. Reiner, who managed the kingdom's treasury for Harvey, naturally had a clear understanding of the cost. The successful military operation had indeed closed an unexpected defensive loophole, but it had yielded no other benefits. The holy city of Goris has now been reduced to ruins. The entire city has completely lost all its value. Tens of thousands of people, the huge wealth accumulated by the church, a large number of rare collections and magical materials, some of which must have been taken away directly by the evacuated moderates, and the rest were either destroyed by bombings and fires, or completely buried in the collapsed Saints Gap, buried together with the demon lizardmen who invaded the city. Even Asdalen couldn't help but suggest to Harvey, I think after this operation to rescue the holy city is over, we should forcefully demand war reparations from the remaining remnants of the church to completely make up for our military losses. Harvey shrugged non-committally. You can let the intelligence officer responsible for contacting them keep in touch with the remaining church leaders. I believe that under desperate circumstances, they will choose to cooperate unconditionally. Desperate? Reiner was stunned for a moment, then suddenly said, Your Majesty, are you planning to stop their evacuation to the south? Harvey chuckled and slowly explained, Why should I stop them? They are already desperate. More than 10,000 ordinary believers, and the Inquisition composed of thousands of bloodline knights, a large number of church priests and pastors. If they don't disperse and seek their own places, any kingdom in the south will regard them as a great threat. Orland was originally a strong supporter of the magical capital of Alair, and naturally would not turn against him to accept the exiled church. Isengard, which originally had the deepest faith foundation, now has nearly half of its territory lost to foreign invaders. The royal family of the Duchy of Barclay, the largest diocese in the central south, has suddenly turned to befriend St. Valen and no longer regards them as political allies. As for the believers and people going to the more distant Faroes or Iruvia, I am afraid that less than 30% of them can persist in following the church to arrive. The vast majority will flee halfway due to the difficult journey or lack of food and clothing, or even gather together to form small roving mobs to harass the surrounding areas. It's not an exaggeration to say they're desperate. As Dallin seemed to guess what Harvey was thinking, and after a moment's silence, he said, "Your Majesty, have you already thought of a place for them? With all due respect, the believers and people who have been completely brainwashed by the church are not worthy of our acceptance. They are even more difficult to convert than those illiterate paupers." Harvey raised an eyebrow and said, "Who said I was going to accept them? My real plan is to block all the routes to exile south, and then force them to return to the holy city of Goris and guard the blocked Saints Gap for me, just in case." Harvey had no intention of cleaning up this utter mess for the church. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.